Okay. Good. Alrighty. Let's take a look at this. So, early initial reports, I looked at TechSpot, which is a written review, is that it's the 7950, 7900 X3D is basically just 13900K. A little bit better 13900K, which is very disappointing. We'll see if it holds true, though. TechSpot does not do a very good job of testing 1%, 0.1%. HuB, I think, is actually probably the best source of information now, but that's where we're at. So let's take a look at this. Let's see if they test partially loaded Windows configuration, which I highly doubt.
Welcome back to Unboxed. Today we're taking a look at the new Ryzen 9 7950X 3D, the first of the.
Oh my god, what about the years of experience he has?
Zen 4 parts. Well, I suppose that's not entirely true because there's also meant to be the 7900X 3D, but AMD hasn't provided a sample for that part. Probably because I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of sense. There'll be just 6 cores with the 3D V cache.
Yep.
So I think either this part or the upcoming 7800X 3D
Yep.
will be the better buys.
Today's video is
There's a reason that they didn't provide the
7900
7900X 3D chips.
27-inch Ultra Gear
What a
OLED
crock of
gaming
shit,
monitor,
guys.
The 27GR95.
They decided to
series.
skimp on the
This
fucking
display is
3D
the
cache to
perfect
save
choice
money.
for high
It's
refresh rate
obnoxious.
HDR gaming.
Oh,
with
just
a
make it sound like it's better
blazing
because it has
fast
higher
240 refresh,
frequency.
which
No.
combined with elite response times gives you super clear.
That was
motion
already a
among
thing in
best
the
ever
7000
tests.
series, or excuse
Plus,
me,
you get
all
a
the
stunning
chips with
HDR
the two
experience
chiplets,
thanks to
the
OLED's per pixel
900
local dimming and
950s
deep zero blacks,
from
giving you that punchy,
AMD, so
vibrant,
with
dazzling
3000
image
series,
quality
3000
we
series a little bit
expect from
different,
a true
5000 series,
HDR
7000
product,
series.
which this is.
They had
I
two different
recommend this
chiplets.
monitor. It performed well in our review
And as
over on
such,
Monitors Unboxed.
yeah.
So to learn more and upgrade yourself to an Ultra Gear OLED, check the links in the description below.
Now, there's also the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which
Yeah, those already
like
had a high.
7700X,
They had a high frequency chip and then a low frequency bin chip to save on money. Basically, is what it came down to. Instead of two really good chips, on a really expensive model, they gave you a good one and a shit one. And now they're giving you a good one, and the shit one has the 3D cache on it, and the good one does not. So, yeah, it made sense internally to them. It doesn't make sense for a consumer standpoint where they're fucking skimping on their high-end products to save money. Fuck you, AMD. And I'm an AMD supporter. I have a 5900X. I have a 3900X. I have a bunch of Ryzen processors, 1000 series.
We're most excited for. So, in typical AMD fashion, they have delayed the release of their most interesting part for another 5 weeks. And why, you might ask? Don't know. And there's really no technical reason for it. So, it would seem as though AMD is doing this simply to push buyers towards spending more on the 7950X 3D or 7900X 3D. Now look, the 7950X 3D is arguably the better deal at $700 as it costs $44 per core, whereas the 7800X 3D at $450, that's set to cost $56 per core, an almost 30% increase. But then only half of the 7950X 3D cores actually feature 3D V cache
They
technology,
fucking tried to
so the
min-max the
comparison
shit out of
isn't
this,
exactly
and I
that
hope it bites them
straightforward.
in the ass.
So, in total, the 7950X 3D packs 128 megabytes of L3 cache, but as this is a dual CCD product, not all of the cores can access all of the L3. The cores in the primary CCD, for example, get the standard 32 megabytes, plus the stacked 64 megabytes of 3D V cache for a total of 96 megabytes, whereas the cores in the second CCD only get the standard 32 megabytes. This means gaming performance has the potential to be significantly improved when the processing is handled by the primary CCD, essentially making the 7950X 3D an 8-core processor. The problem, or rather challenge, is that it's imperative that the 3D V cache-enabled cores handle gaming tasks, with the second CCD being treated more as if they were E-cores of an Intel processor. And AMD's dual CCD CPUs are really quite tricky when it comes to gaming, and we often see a performance decline due to the larger latency penalty seen when communicating across the Infinity Fabric. This makes the 59X3D more of a hybrid gaming CPU in my opinion. It's unlikely to be AMD's best gaming CPU, nor will it be their best productivity CPU. The best gaming CPU is almost certainly going to be the 7800X3D,
Yep.
while the best productivity CPU will be the standard 7950X,
Yep.
as it's able to clock higher. Now, the 7800X 3D, that won't suffer the same latency penalty when communicating amongst cores, and you don't have to worry about how the operating system or game utilizes or sees the CPU. Meanwhile, the 7950X will be faster for productivity work, again, just for the simple fact that the cores can clock higher. So the 7950X 3D is really for those who want to work and play, and are looking for sort of the best possible performance for both tasks out of a single chip. Now, to ensure that the processor works correctly, AMD recommends using the latest version of either Windows 10 or Windows 11, a 3D V-cache specific BIOS for your AM5 motherboard, so a BIOS update will be required for optimal performance. Game mode must be enabled. The Xbox Game Bar app needs to be up to date, and the latest chipset
because
driver
it actually causes
must be
problems.
installed.
Can cause problems.
Out of interest, I decided to test the 7950X 3D on my existing AM5 test system with no updates, and I can confirm performance was poor, basically slower than the 7950X in all of the games I tested. So you absolutely need the correct BIOS and chipset driver at a minimum. Now, all of the testing was conducted on our new AM5 test system built inside the Corsair 4000D airflow case using the iQOO H150i Elite LCD XT liquid cooler, RM1200X shift power supply, and 4TB MP600 Pro XT. And my this power use an AMD Phillies. MSI is pricing the Tomahawk at $330 US.
Basically like product advertising in here.
GeForce RTX during the Cinebench
And it's
R23
obviously
all-core
important,
workload.
but
The 3D V-cache enabled CCD1 typically clocks between 4,750 and 4,800 megahertz, whereas CCD2 with the standard 32 megabytes of L3 cache that clocked its cores at 4,900 megahertz. The standard 7950X, for example, clocks the CCD1 cores at 5.1 gigahertz and CCD2 at 4.9 gigahertz, so around a 4% clock speed advantage for the original model. Also worth noting is that along with the lower TDP when compared to the standard 7950X, 120 watts versus 170 watts, the 3D V-cache part also sees the TJ max lowered from 95 degrees to 85 degrees. So I guess that's good news for those of you who didn't believe that 95 degrees was a safe operating temperature for Zen 4, that it was done by design. Hopefully 85 degrees is more acceptable there because this will be the operating temperature with pretty much any AIO or air cooler. And the results you're seeing here are with the Corsair iQOO H150i.
Can't design a part to operate within a certain tolerance level of temperature.
Enabled, so the 3D
Fuck, people
V-cache
online are
enabled
weird.
CCD, the clocks were slightly higher at 4,830 megahertz, so around a % increase compared to what we saw with both CCDs enabled. Then, if we disable CCD1 and just have the second CCD enabled,
I'm honestly, I think this is either a choice between me having to wait for the 7800X3D or buying a 7950X3D. I don't think the 7900X is going to be an option because it's so fucking weird.
7950X 3D, you would
It only
see
has
a
6
bit of a
cores with the
performance
V-cache on
uplift,
it,
but due to time,
3D
this
cache.
is something that we've been able to explore for this review. And this right here is why I'm not going to waste your time with a load of productivity benchmarks. If you want to know how the 7950X 3D performs for compression, decompression, video production, and code compilation work, please just watch our 7950X video and deduct about 5% from the result. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Cinebench R23, where the 3D V-cache model is 5% slower than the original, making it 12% slower than the 13900KS, though power usage of the Core i9 to achieve this result is pretty insane, and we'll look at that in a moment. Single core performance should be much the same, especially if the application is instructed to prioritize the second CCD without the 3D V-cache, as those cores do clock higher. Here, the 7950X 3D was just 1.5% slower than the 7950X, though that did make it substantially slower than the 12900KS, as it was 13% slower. So for lightly
Kind of sad, guys. I waited 6 months for this shit, and I'm pretty sure I'm just going to end up buying a 13900K at the end of all this.
Quite a bit slower than the 13900KS. Here, for example, it is 11% slower, and then 3% slower than the standard 7950X.
I love God AMD.
Now, while those E-cores of the 13900K are great for accelerating Cinebench scores, they're not always that efficient. And here we find that to be the case in Blender, where the 7950X 3D is 8% faster than the 13900KS, and again, just 3% slower than the standard 7950X.
I believe the 13900K is 500.
The 13900K, when it comes to productivity, is power consumption. And while you can enforce power limits, that will reduce performance, extending the 7950X's lead further. So, whereas the 13900K/KS pushed total system consumption to just shy of 500 watts, the 7950X 3D ran comfortably under 300 watts.
God damn it,
using
AMD.
less power than even the 13600K, which is super impressive. Also, despite the addition of the 64 megabyte 3D V-cache, total system usage was reduced by 30% when compared to the standard 7950X, and again, that is due to the 120 watt TDP versus the 170 watt TDP of the original. Okay, so time for the gaming benchmarks, and we'll start with Factorio, which was an impressive showing for the 5800X 3D.
There's an
and
option
is
in the
still-
BIOS to prefer frequency or prefer cache, and it looks like he's not testing that, unfortunately. TechSpot tested it, though, as well as an overclock setting. Kind of
Still to
sad
this
here,
day.
but we'll see where this
The
goes.
7950X 3D, on the other hand, not so much, as the 3D Vcache enabled chip was really no faster than the standard 7950X. It appears as though this workload is running on the
550.
wrong CCD and is therefore not taking advantage of the 3D Vcache. And to prove this theory, I just went ahead and disabled the second CCD in the BIOS and reran the test, labeling the result as 7800X 3D simulated, because I think that's essentially what this configuration is. And this does look a lot better. With the second CCD disabled, we're seeing an almost 80% increase in performance for the 7950X 3D, aka 7800X 3D. With a score of 433 points, the upcoming
I mean, this looks really fucking fantastic. Factorio is not really that good of a game as far as bench. Like, this doesn't matter. Performance doesn't matter in Factorio for the most part. It's fun to look at from like a technical standpoint, but it's almost a simulated benchmark. This right here is basically out of the box performance that you get with no finagling on 1300K, which isn't really that good in comparison.
Be
but
around 25% faster than the 5800X 3D and 60% faster than the 13900K, giving AMD an easy win in simulation games such as Factorio. Now, for testing CPU performance in Hogwarts, we're testing in the Hogsmeade section of the game. Here, the 7950X 3D produced the best result yet with an average frame rate of 84 FPS, though this made it just 5% faster than the 13900KS using 7200 memory, but it was also a 14% uplift over the standard 7950X. Then, with the second CC disabled, performance did decline in this example, suggesting that the 7800X
I think the 7900X 3D is
going
to be an absolute fucking bomb.
This title. Now, Spider-Man Remastered appears to hit a performance wall around 140 FPS. The 7950X 3D was good for 136 FPS, which allowed it to match the 1300K/KS with the Intel CPUs using DDR5 6400 memory. This also meant the 7950X 3D was 10% faster than the 7950X, so not a massive uplift there, but a nice performance boost all the same. However, if we disable the second CCD for a 7800X 3D simulated result, the average frame rate improved by 3%, 1% lows by a much more substantial 7%, and this means the 7800X 3D could be up to 20% faster than the 7700X in this game. Now, ACC was a big hit for the 5800X 3D.
Imagine buying
all other CPUs
7950X 3D just to turn off one of the
Intel has largely caught up
chiplets.
with their 13th gen series, and now the 5800X 3D is just 3% faster than the 13900.
I think there's a way you can actually flag it so they'll tell you. Basically, there's a communication with the driver to the CPU, and you have to tell it basically that you're in a game, and you do that by turning on the game bar. From what I understand, in comments I read earlier.
Zen 4 3D Vcache parts really aren't that much faster, at least in this example. Next up, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the 7950X 3D was 5% faster than the 13900KS using DDR5 7200, so a good result there for AMD. The 3D Vcache is also providing around a 20% boost over the standard 7950X. Now, disabling the second CCD did boost performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, increasing the average frame rate by a further 5%. However, it was the massive 18% increase in 1% lows that stood out the most here. The original Zen 4 parts already offered strong 1% lows in this title, and with that second CC disabled, that pattern continues. Now, Rainbow Six Extraction, like Factorio, just sucks with the 7950X 3D, and in fact, performance here is broken. I did notify AMD of this, but they didn't get back to me with a solution in time for this review, so the results remain as they are. And when I say sucks, I mean at least when compared to the 7950X. The end result is still highly playable performance and very satisfactory.
But worse than a 1500X 3D.
287 FPS, but the average frame rate was still 16% lower than that of the standard 7950X. So we are going a bit backwards here. And this is an odd result that doesn't really make sense, and I expect AMD will be able to address this issue. And we find when disabling the second CCD that does in fact address the issue, as the now simulated 7800X 3D result is the best of any CPU tested, beating the 7700X by a 1.5% margin, though 1% lows were improved by 6%. Moving on to Watch Dogs Legion, and here the 7950X 3D really impressed with 214 FPS, making it 14% faster than the 13900KS running DDR5 7200.
This means I need to wait five weeks, guys.
Than
Oh,
the
jeez.
standard 7950X. Also, in this title,
Or by
disabling the second
13900K.
CCD resulted in no real performance gain, so this is a great showing for the 7950X 3D. I have to say the Hitman 3 performance is fairly underwhelming. Here the 7950X was just a few frames faster than the standard model, and we're seeing a similar thing when comparing the simulated 7800X 3D to the 7700X. So the 3D V cache appears worthless in this title, or at least it was in the section of the game we use for testing. And this meant the 13900KS using 7200 memory was 5% faster than the 7950X. Next we have the Horizon Zero Dawn results, and here Zen 4 already performed really well, and as we've recently discovered, this isn't a memory sensitive game, and it's probably one of the least memory sensitive games you're likely to come across. Looking at the 7950X 3D, you'd think Vcache doesn't help much here, as we're seeing just a 6% boost over the 7950X when looking at the average frame rate. However, disabling the second CCD did boost performance by a further 7%, making
There's a BIOS setting as mentioned to prefer cache or prefer frequency.
And 28% faster than the 13900X.
And they didn't either.
DDR5 7200.
I'm pretty sure prefer cache
Now,
would
for Cyberpunk
but even be
2077,
faster.
we've updated the testing to use the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, as this can increase CPU load. The margins, though, really aren't that different to what we saw with the previous test method using the medium preset. Here, the 7950X 3D was just 4% faster than the 7950X, allowing it to match the 13900KS using DDR5 7200. The Rift Breaker appears to be topping out at around 225 to 230 FPS, but even so, the 7950X 3D saw an 18% increase in average frame rate compared to
Probably GPU bottlenecked. And once again, I hope he checks this shit. I've talked about this before in the past, and at this point, it's basically beating a dead cow. Yeah, this looks an awful lot like there's a GPU bottleneck here, and he's testing on high settings to begin with, but he doesn't mention it, and so we just assume that he has tested this, right? That he has actually looked at this. This is one of the reasons, for instance, that I really, really think there's a lot of room for tech tubers to improve, or just tech reviewers in general to improve, but there's no fucking money here, so why would you do it? It's kind of like one of those things, because it definitely looks an awful lot like this is GPU bound here, and you should know better than that, and we assume that it's not GPU bound because he's not saying it, but he hasn't explicitly also said that it's not GPU bound, so.
To the standard 7950X, so the 3D V cache is offering a nice performance gain here. This also allowed the 7950X 3D to match the Core i9 processors, and moreover, disabling the second CCD didn't help improve performance, so the 7950X 3D and 7800X 3D should deliver very similar results in this title. Sadly, performance in Counter-Strike Global Offensive does go backwards with the 3D V cache parts, as core frequency is the performance limitation here, not cache capacity, and this will be true for most older games. We are still seeing 1% lows of over 300 FPS, so I wouldn't say performance is an issue here, but it is still lower than the standard 7950X. Last up, we have a Plague Tale Requiem, and here we're seeing a massive 25% performance boost with the 7950X 3D over the standard model. This was enough to see AMD overtake Intel's 13900KS, albeit by just a 6% margin. Now, disabling the second CCD did again improve performance, though this time by just a 3% margin. Finally, here's a look at our 12-game average, and as you can see, the 7950X 3D and 13900K/KS are very similar overall with no real difference in performance. The 7800X 3D should be slightly faster again, but overall there's really not much in it. So, the 13900K and these new 3D Vcache CPUs are pretty well neck and neck. AMD certainly hasn't blown Intel out of the water here, but when looking at out-of-the-box performance, they do have a very, very slight edge. And it's also worth noting that the 7950X 3D was on average 9% faster than the standard 7950X, while the 7800X
But
13900K
is $500.
10% faster than the 7700X. So some decent performance uplifts there, but not massive overall. So there you have it, the Ryzen 9 7950X 3D. It's an impressive CPU that does a good job of combining strong productivity performance with class-leading gaming performance. So if you're after a CPU that can do it all, the 7950X 3D is going to be an attractive option. But as we saw with the simulated 7800X 3D results, if you're just gaming feel like the cheaper 8-core part is going to deliver a much more consistent
Price
gaming
performance is
experience, or at
going to
least
be,
much more consistent
yeah.
performance. And really, even when the 7950X 3D performs as intended, the 700X 3D will still generally be the faster processor. As for which is the better gaming CPU, the 7950X 3D or the 13900K/KS, well, it really does depend on the game, but overall, I think in my opinion, it's quite clear that they are very similar. I'm not going to bother with a cost per frame comparison here. We're really only interested in these two processors, and value probably takes a backseat to performance when talking about the absolute best.
One's $550, another's $700. So
compromise type gaming solutions, the kind of description that we used to apply to parts like the 8700K and 9900K.
Are you just lazy?
Still,
The fuck is that?
The 7950X 3D is set to cost around 20% more than the 13900K, which can currently be had for $580 US.
$550.
A decent Z790 motherboard, they look to start at around $230, while AMD's X670 boards, they're more like $280 there, so quite a premium for the motherboard. The DDR5 memory used for testing,
you can get them for like $200. You're getting a B650.
Skills DDR5 6000 CL30 stuff, that's about $175.
So you're still doing a price analysis. You're just not using graphs. You just give. You just like whatever. I'm not going to do this.
$5 more, so a negligible difference. And that means you
basically just did a price performance comparison just with words and no graphs.
X 3D combo, and then about $1,000 for the 13900K combo, making AMD around 20% more expensive. So bit surprising that I say AMD is so much more expensive than Intel.
I guess you got tired of doing graphs.
Pricing gap that could see you go with premium DDR5 7200 memory with the 13900K and still save $100 US. There's probably more tuning headroom when it comes to memory timings with the 13900K as well. And this is something I plan to look at in a few weeks when I get back from my holiday, as long as there's no more damn products released between now and then. And speaking of which, my review was cut short, as I did have to leave for a trip away, so apologies for the lack of testing here. I know there is a lot more to look at, and there's a lot more that I do want to look at, and that is something I'll do in the near future. But I do have a memory scaling benchmark with the 7950X 3D coming up in the next few days, so I did squeeze that in. So you could say a little something that I'd prepared earlier. Overall, the 7950X 3D, it's impressive, but it doesn't exactly bury the 13900K, and in fact the Core i9 looks as viable as ever. The 7800X 3D though is probably going to be the better value option, as it will come in a little bit cheaper than
and it
the
doesn't have any
13900K
finagling with the cache.
Generally offering slightly better performance, at least based on what we've seen here. But of course there will be a 40 to 50 game benchmark coming up shortly after the release of that part, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But if you want to buy today,
in order to find stuff that I actually want to, we have to wait for his vacation to be over.
In the foot, I should probably just go with the Core i9 13900K, especially at its current sale price of $580 US. Bit of a timely discount there. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. But just a reminder, we will have a lot more CPU content in the very near future, so make sure you subscribe for that. Also, if you'd like to support the channel directly and get some cool perks in return, we have Float, Plane, or Patreon. Links for those are in the video description. You get access to monthly live streams with Tim and myself. We do those live, answer your stuff in chat and talk with you guys. We have also a Discord server, members only server, where we do exactly that, and plus other stuff, behind the scenes content, Q&As. A lot of cool stuff there, so check it out if you're interested, but if not, hey, that's fine.
I don't take vacations either. I'm always on work. I'm always working and never working at all. Maybe it's time for you to take a vacation, Slane. Go to Puerto Rico or something. Kids there will love you or something. I don't know. Huh. Gamerz Nexus now.
AMD
these R9 7950 XD,
I mean, that means every day's a
do be
vacation for
looking
you.
a little sus, and we'll talk about why. But it's actually really interesting. So there's a 3 cache CPU. That means they've taken a massive amount of L3
Might skip
cache
through
and they've
the
physically stacked it on top of one of the CCDs in the CPU.
pleasantries, the
So it
platitudes
follows up
here.
the wildly successful 5800X3D, which was powerful enough that it sort of
Oh,
stole
there's the meter.
sales
Oh
from
my
AMD's
God.
own follow-up in the
8? I thought he's at like
7000 series.
13.
And
The
now
fuck
they're
is
bringing
this?
X3D to the new
14.
7000 series as
What is
well.
this? My level's
So,
higher than his.
X3D is super interesting because in gaming specifically, it helps a lot. But the way it's oriented on the 7950X3D actually means turning off half the cores yields far better performance. We'll show you that today in this in-depth review and explanation of how it behaves and how the V-cache is arranged on this as opposed to the previous 5800X3D. So pricing is $700 for the 7950X3D. Very expensive, obviously. It's at the highest end for desktop CPUs, followed by the 7900X3D, which is a $600 part, and that one is followed by the $450 7800X3D, which is being held until April. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li's O11D Evo case. The O11D Evo is a mid-tower that tested well previously with us and is most interesting for attention to fine details and its unique features. One of those is the easy-to-use invertible
they tested
layout.
the new
The O11D Evo inversion process
OLED
is the
panel.
easiest we've ever worked with.
I
on a
actually want to
case,
take a look at that
allowing
too.
it to flip entirely for a unique upside-down build or work as a standard layout. Is about AMD only sampled the media for the 7950X3D. Anyone who has different ones today got it somewhere else. That normally, it's a little bit of an alarm bell. We don't mind paying for our own parts. It's normally the thing that raises question is the choice of what was excluded. Because typically the one that's excluded will either make the one that was sent look bad or itself will look bad. So AMD didn't send out the 7900X3D. It's fine. We're going to buy one. We'll review it just like all the others.
I'm not buying
But
one.
the
I'm pretty sure
7800X3D
it's
is
shit.
the one that
That's
we're a little
literally
more
just hypothesized that on stream, guys.
curious
And
about
yeah,
because
very certain the 7900X3D is just going to be garbage and it's not worth buying. I'm not going to buy it tomorrow. They go on sale late, not tomorrow, today. They go on sale later this morning. I'm not buying one. I think what's going to happen here is I'm either going to buy a 13900K or I am going to buy a 7800X3D. And that depends a lot on how these benchmarks turn out. I might just opt and get a 3900K, even though they've been out for fucking 6 months.
because it's pushed
Christ,
back
AMD.
into April.
Can't put-
after the results we
can't
got
put
today, we're
cash in
thinking
both
maybe
chips. Nope.
It will be extremely competitive with the 7950X3D, and they don't want to cannibalize sales. Now, it's possible we're completely wrong about that, but
No,
at least
it's
as far
totally
as
true.
gaming, it's probably accurate based on what we know now. Production, totally different story. It's 2 times the cores on the 7950, so it's going to outperform anyway, regardless of the cache arrangement. But if you're buying one for gaming, we just wanted to let you know up front, hey, it might be worth waiting until April and seeing where that one falls. You might be able to save a lot of money if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah.
It's more of a
Or just buy a
5800X3D
3900K.
replacement in that regard. And when I was talking
That
with
depends
the
on
team
how these
about
benchmarks
the
turn out.
7950X3D's pricing, Jeremy said it excellently. He said it feels like AMD is going, let's see who will spend $700 before they launch the others. Here's how it all looks. The 7950X3D has 3 chiplets. There's 1 I/O die, there are 2 core dies or CCDs, there's 16 total cores and 32 threads, just like a regular 7950. The big difference is the addition of that 3DV cache, and that gives the 7950X3D a total of 128 megabytes of L3 cache
On
across
one of
the
the
whole
chiplets.
CPU. So that's double the amount of the standard 7950X. AMD confirmed with Gamers Nexus that the left CCD, oriented with the I/O die
I could
at the
do half
bottom,
that and put it
is
on
always the
both,
one
and it
with
would have
the
been a better
V-cache.
solution.
That should mean that games and applications that benefited from the increased cache of the last gen 5800X3D will exhibit the same behavior here, but there's a potential snag this time. Since only one of the 2 CCDs has the extra cache, that means that the one with the extra cache, the left CCD, will run at a lower frequency than the unit without the extra cache. And that means that there's potential for worse performance in some situations than a 7950X, or if you configure it incorrectly, which is really easy to do. This complication is something AMD has been working with Microsoft on to help build mechanisms to control for games and Windows. In a conversation with AMD, we learned that the cores on the rightmost CCD can still of course, access the L3 cache that is located physically on top of the left CCD, but as you would expect, there's a latency penalty because now you're traveling cross-channel, basically across the fabric lane.
Shouldn't
to
matter that much,
the
but
first CCD
apparently
with
it
the
does.
cache. So there's a latency hit, which is suboptimal, and that's also something AMD's working with Microsoft on, but they've also built some optimizers that you can install, and you should. Otherwise, you're going to have worse performance than expected. Additionally, we asked if there's a particular selection process for which CCD or which chiplet gets the cache, and AMD said this. Although we don't comment specifically on binning, I can say that the criteria that would be a top binned Vcache die may not always be the same as a top binned standard die. It would not be an accurate assumption that slow dies become Vcache CCDs and fast dies become standard CCDs, since they may not have the same criteria for evaluating these statements. So
But they didn't say
helpful.
they're
Now,
mostly
another
true.
big change here is the thermal design and the power. When the 7950X first launched, one of the biggest difference between it and the previous CPUs is that it would boost to TJ Max, so it would run right up until 95 degrees Celsius. It would boost contingent on the cooler that you use, and that has changed this time, as has the TDP. We're going to move the explanation of that after the charts, though, so we can get to the charts faster, because we know that's what you're all interested in. So, getting into that, the 7950X3D was actually one of the most complicated test setups we had to configure in recent memory. The usual notes apply, of course, for you all, where it's just be sure to install the latest chipset drivers. It really matters here. And be sure to install the latest BIOS, especially if you're buying your launch. That matters a lot. It may work without it, but it will work better with the latest BIOS.
Ah, I see
So the
propyl
things in the
alcohol.
chipset you need to install include AMD PPM and AMD Performance Optimizer. These are new, and they are. We're seeing the first 17 threads get loaded to at least 37%, with descending utilization once we're past the first few cores. Core 0, thread 0 gets the most load. Then core 1, thread 0, which is listed as thread 2 on this chart. Threads 18 to 31, which includes their host cores, are doing nothing. They're parked. Running them actually worsens the performance in a lot of these games. So it's a callback to AMD's old game mode behavior, except it doesn't turn the
Yikes,
cores
you have to
off
turn core
when doing
parking
a
on,
task
which is
that
usually a bad
isn't
thing.
identified as a game by Xbox Game Bar. So production applications get all the cores, and this behavior is important if you want to maximize the CPU. Our next chart is between the 7950X3D with the two new optimizer features specific to X3D and the most recent pre-launch driver that was lacking them. This chart shows a simple A/B comparison with a 100% baseline performance for the prior driver. The red line shows the new driver and the optimizers, which are considered stock
Gamers Nexus didn't
performance,
test this, by the
and
way, or Hardware
any
Unboxed
lead
didn't
is
test
shown
this.
as over 100%. This shows
They said
why
they
it's
did,
important to
and it didn't
install the
matter. Like, you should have
driver
obviously the
and
new
utilize
stuff, but
those
they didn't actually
features
make charts
if
for
you're
it.
going to be gaming on the X3D CPUs, because it helps assign priority and scheduling. Now, you should always be installing chipset drivers with a brand new machine anyway,
Yep.
but specifically make sure those two by default checked options are in fact checked. The Tomb Raider result increased by 35% just by going to the appropriate driver for this CPU and getting off the older one, with F1 at 31% improved, Final Fantasy at 28% improved, and so on. It's clear that there's an advantage. Now, the reason we include this is because it would be really easy to lose a ton of performance and not know why as an end user if you just download some driver
We covered this
package
yesterday
chipset
with the
and you
whole
don't
GOAT
realize
thing.
that
There's
the
some
newest
people that
one
just
actually
don't
does contain
understand that they have to do
differences.
basic
So we're just trying
stuff,
to help you all be
right?
aware of how to set these up.
Like, this
to
is
get
a
the
basic
most out of them.
checkbox, and some people miss
This
this
also applies
shit.
to production applications. You can see that in this chart. There's no point belaboring it, but it's clearly beneficial, and it's just not as important as it is in the games. Those are the first two charts. We have a big explanation for how this works. It is actually really interesting on a technology level. We're going to put that at the back of the review because we know everybody just wants to see numbers. So we're going to get into the competitive charts right now and then stick around
More
or at
games
least
is better.
jump ahead to learn about how all this core parking behavior works. So it's really cool. Okay, game charts. We're putting Far Cry 6 up
I have
front
core parking
because
turned
it's
off,
the
by the way,
second
'cause
most
it usually
interesting
ruins
result.
performance and
The
causes
most
stuttering.
interesting result is next. This game in particular showed strong performance on the 58X3D back when we reviewed the first 3D Vcache CPU, and we expect to see the same here. That doesn't mean the behavior scales to every other game, but at least shows the upper bound of Vcache's capabilities. Getting to the chart, the 7950X3D ran at 198 FPS average with lows proportionally spaced at 145 FPS for 1% and 120 for 0.1%. This is a moderate victory for the X3D because it shows real scaling against the 7950X Normal Edition. It's our new name for it. The gain is 15% here, moving from 172 FPS to 198 FPS average. We already talked about the older chipset driver tests, but just to put it into more context, we can see that the driver without performance optimizations is actually
So they even took
slower
time to
than
test it, but they
even
didn't test the
7600X,
prefer cache, prefer
and it places closer
frequency.
to a 7600X. The 7950X3D's performance allows AMD to break ahead of Intel for the first time since the 5800X3D in this game chart. The 58X3D itself is still faster than all of the other AMD parts on this benchmark, even a couple frames ahead of the 7950X9 3D. The new X3D position is roughly tied with Intel, with neither Intel nor AMD holding a meaningful advantage over the other in any of our three measurements, average 1% or 0.1%. Just quickly and as an older reference, prior 16-core CPUs ran at 138 FPS average for the 5950X and 111 for the 3950X.
13900K is about on par with
79%
7950X3D.
to the new X3D respectively. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is next. This one is the most interesting, primarily because the X3D performance here is absolutely insane. The 5800X3D was already impressive with its 332 FPS average results, leading even the well-performing 13900K
Like
by an
30%
embarrassing
faster.
9%. The 7950X3D rubs salt even deeper into those wounds, climbing to a massive 383 FPS average for a staggering
They didn't test
26%
the cache
lead
frequency here,
over the 13900K.
nor simulated 7800X3D.
That's about the same when compared to the 7950X non-3D, where we're seeing a 25% improvement.
Like I mentioned, guys, it's kind of weird. There is a lot of room. There's a lot of room for tech or just tech review in general to improve on. Each one of these reviews has missed something, including the TechSpot review, missed basically 1% to 0.1%, even though they kind of tested it, they didn't do a good job of it. Yeah, like each one of these websites and each one of these people that, videos that I looked at, is missing something that they just didn't test right or at all, for the most part. Yeah, kind of weird. This is why you have to look at multiple outlets.
X3D performance is remarkable in this game. It won't always be like this, clearly. This is the standout chart in this review. But there's something satisfying about seeing new technology prove to be more than just a keynote point to impress investors who don't know anything and haven't played a game since Pac-Man. The 13900K is
If they played
obviously
Pac-Man,
still
they
a
probably
good
watched their
part,
kids play
and price
Pac-Man.
clearly doesn't favor the 7950X3D when speaking generally, just in terms of value. But AMD gets some leeway when it can establish itself as a best on a chart, just like Intel does.
50% faster than my
We're
5900X.
suspicious of the 78X3D, possibly embarrassing AMD's own 7950X3D, but we'll find out for that one in April. As for the 58X3D, that's still the
Or they
best
could have
value on
simulated
this
it,
chart,
which they
assuming
didn't
you
do.
can still find one, especially if it's still in
By
the
turning off
300.
one of the dies.
Just quickly comparing
It's
to
not
other
quite the
parts,
same thing, but
7950X3D leads the
it's pretty close.
5950X by 150 FPS average generationally, or about 60%, and the improvement over the 3950X is about 125%. Final Fantasy XIV is up now, tested with the Endwalker expansion and using the benchmark tool for more consistency. The 7950X3D isn't a chart leader here, but it does get closer than before. If you take a zoomed out look at this chart, you'll notice that Intel was previously uninterrupted in its dominance for almost the top half
Gamers
of the
Nexus
chart.
didn't
We'll
test,
just highlight all of them and make it easy. It had a substantial lead, a result of this game in particular having strong
Fucking
performance
vacation
and
time.
affinity
Gamers,
for Intel
HuB Unboxed
CPUs.
didn't test
The 7950X3D breaks out
Call
of
of
the
Duty,
box that
which
AMD was
actually is where it
previously
performs
placed
really
in,
well.
which capped at about 230
Yikes.
FPS
Bad time
before,
for vacation. I
and
assume
it
he's going on
now ties
vacation
with the
because it's
13600K.
around spring break and that's when his kids want to go on
Unfortunately,
vacation or
its 0.1% lows
something.
dropped down significantly
pretty
from
shit.
the 13600K, and the value is obviously not good in this instance anyway. The improvement over the non-3D is at least 20%, so it is working. Just testing the technology alone, that's a big jump, and that's important. And the 58X3D previously showed similar advantages, which you can still see here. But Intel takes the lead in this one, and AMD's frame time performance isn't as consistent as
I think you
Intel's
have to.
here.
I think that's a big
Smoothing
deal if you
out those
don't.
1%
So.
and 0.1% lows would further bolster AMD's average and push it higher, even if it's at the cost of some of the peaks. And now we get
That's
into
not the
some
same thing as
scenarios
adult
where
only,
the
by the way.
750X3D isn't that impressive. In Counter-Strike Go, the 13900K leads the charts with a 427 FPS average. The 7950X follows that at 419 FPS average, and the 7950X3D has a few entries here. We've added one set of 4 test passes with the preferred
Sure it does.
frequency
I thought it was the same
setting
thing.
enabled.
I'm sure it
Then
does.
the stock results, and then we have the old driver result. While preferred frequency did boost the average frame rate from 384 to 409,
It's the only chart with. Did they just discover that preferred
few
frequency exists?
and now we get into some. But Intel takes the lead in this one.
Like,
and
there's no
AMD's
preferred
frame time
frequency or
performance isn't
preferred
as consistent as Intel's
cache
here.
here.
Smoothing out, higher even 3D isn't that impressive. In Counter-Strike Go, the 13900K leads the charts with a 427 FPS average. The 7950X follows that at 419 FPS average, and the 7950X3D has a few entries here. We've added one set of 4 test passes with the prefer frequency BIOS setting enabled, then the stock result, and then we have the old driver result. While preferred frequency did boost the average frame rate,
Like, there were
from
more
384
important things here to test than the old driver result, by the way. Just telling people to do it is a good flag. Wasting time on this when, like, obviously they might be, you know, they could have spent time on prefer frequency. It's kind of a big deal. I don't know why they do this. Once again, very weird testing. Like, sometimes these tech tubers don't really logically select the right boxes here, but this is where we're at, so that's what we have.
409, so it looks like it's working. That's a 7% increase after all. It actually worsened the lows massively by hurting the frame time consistency. It dropped to 94 FPS 0.1% from 166 previously. So if you're using the prefer frequency setting, just be careful that if you only look at average FPS when you do a quick comparison, it may be misleading you and not telling you the full story. Ultimately, the non-X3D is 9% ahead of the stock X3D's 384 FPS average anyway, and the 13900K, 7700X, and 13700K all offer better value. Vcache doesn't always win. Sometimes it's actually regressive in performance. And that's for the reasons we said earlier, where it's not necessarily the Vcache itself, but rather how they are restructuring the CPU around the Vcache in order to accommodate it.
Yep.
1440p produces largely the same results. The test is CPU
Now they're
bound,
testing
so although
preferred
there's some
frequency?
shuffling,
Okay.
there's no real change between the two data sets. We just wanted to present
Actually,
it in
it's the
case
same
you were
as
wondering about a
Counter-Strike,
higher
just higher
resolution.
resolution.
Rainbow Six Siege is up now, another super
preferred
high
frequency.
FPS. This high FPS has the FPS at about 858 FPS for the 13900K, an effing high FPS. The 7950X3D is next at 841 average FPS, allowing the 13900K's FPS a 2% lead in average FPS in this FPS game. It's obviously completely unacceptable to forfeit 17.3 FPS average to the 13900K here, because it renders the game totally unplayable. If you
I wonder why the 13700K actually has higher 1% here, 0.1% than the 13900K, and they should test it enough where this is actually a thing. This is just has 4 less E-cores, or excuse me, 8 less E-cores, but for some reason it chops off some of the 0.1%.
you didn't suck already, you will now. If the X3D had sacrificed only 17.1 FPS, or nay, even 17.2 FPS, it'd be fine. But 17.3 crosses that line. The 7950X3D leads the non-3D by 2%, unexcitingly, and the lead over the 5950X is 23%, with the 3950X gapped at 76%. Ultimately, tying the 13700K isn't impressive, nor is the 10% lead
Yeah.
over the 5800X.
You mean because I'm just not a complete
so
asshole?
Let's move on from
Yeah.
talking about FPS.
I mean,
and
kids
FPS
could
for
watch
things
me.
that have
I don't
high
definitely
FPS.
cater to
Cyberpunk
kids, though.
2077 is next.
I have
tested
had kids watch me
1080p
before in
and
the
with
past,
custom
which
settings
is
that
something
lean
you
towards
generally don't
medium.
want people to
This
tell you,
game
is
is
that
still
you,
GPU
like, you're
intensive
not
enough that it
18 or
gives us a
older. I prefer if
perspective
anyone
for how
watches
much
me,
a
they're 18 or
CPU
older.
can possibly matter for gaming. Ultimately here,
Because some of the stuff that I do discuss is the stuff I want to discuss with kids. So
won't be visible,
there's a lot
or at least they'll
of there's
be
a lot of there's a lot of things I don't want to have a good discussion with kids with because they're kids. And kids generally their brains are still developing. Physically and mentally are still developing, and as such you can't really have good conversations with kids. It's like it's arguing with someone that might not be at the top of their game, like under the weather or something, or things just don't click right because logically their brain isn't formed properly, or not properly, completely formed. And as such, it's a waste of time in my opinion. It's generally just a waste of time talking to kids if you want to talk about anything important. Obviously, if you're a parent, that's different because that's a job, and me being here is not. Well, it is a job, but it's not my job to talk to your kids. So, yeah, like I could, but I don't, and I wouldn't want to. Who's a good kid streamer? He's a Fortnite streamer. What's his name? I don't remember his name. He's a Fortnite streamer. He's supposed to be family friendly and shit. I'm not family friendly. I don't want to be family friendly. Because then it locks you into a scenario where you can't say fuck and fuck you and get angry and stuff. You have to be this wholesome fucking Care Bear and shit. I don't want to do that.
minimized at the very top end.
That's not my.
Cyberpunk still scales,
That's not
but
my
there are clear
go-to.
divisions in that scaling. The 7950X3D leads
I'm not
the
here
chart
to
with its
babysit your
268
kids.
FPS average, although 0.1% lows dip when compared to the 13900K, but not in a way that's relevant. And to be fair,
Oh my
the
God,
average
did I not
FPS
update my
is also
title?
not particularly relevant when we're talking 3 to 4 FPS. Also, FPS, I still have semantic satiation for after the last chart. The 7950X's 231 FPS average allows the X3D a more meaningful lead of 16%. Vcache is still doing what it's supposed to do, just like we saw in the 58X3D with its tie-in of the 7900X. You can see that the other 5000 series chips we tested got stuck at around 190 FPS instead, so the performance improvement is consistent with Vcache. The X3D's value isn't good here, but at least it's provable in terms of uplift. The 13600K is probably the most sensible of the top 4 performers. F1 2022 is up now. In this one, we're testing at 1080p.
Like I want a
high
Vcache
70s.
CPU.
The 7950X3D is
I don't want to spend
$513
$700,
carried
and
with
it's
it
going to be 5
proportionally
weeks
scaled
until
lows
7800X3D comes around.
at
And I think the 7900X3D is going to be a piece of shit.
Ahead of the
It's going to be a shit show.
and it's
If you can turn off
460
individual
FPS
cores, you can
result.
test the
The improvement over the
7900X
non-3D
basically.
7950X is 20% here, with the lead over the 5800X3D at 21%. For an older comparison, the 5800X...
Actually, I don't even know if a simulated comparison is actually a completely simulated comparison, because putting aside how they bend the chips might be differently for a 7800X3D, at the same time, the driver could think that you have a 7950 and it tries talking to basically a chip that's not there, and it causes issues. So a simulated result might not even be a realistic result.
gives up a 52% improvement.
Depends on what
with
it,
the
how it shows up.
3950X getting doubled by the new
Same thing as
X3D.
turning off cores.
Finally,
I was
our
just thinking about
Total
this,
War
turning off
Warhammer 3
cores.
benchmark is last for games. We'll look at power in production next. The 13900K leads with the 360 FPS average result that you see here, followed next by the 13700K. The 7950X3D shows up in third at 304 FPS average, with not meaningfully lower 0.1% lows. Compared to the non-X3D, we're seeing a gain of 10%. It's not massive, but it's not bad either. It's certainly better than we saw in CSGO. Intel still ultimately wins this one, and the 13600K once again proves that it's very good value for something that nearly behaves exactly like one of these high-end CPUs. Power consumption testing is up now. For this, we look at just 100% all-core workloads as a worst-case scenario. This isn't the same as when you're gaming, because typically there's more shared work between the GPU and the CPU and other components, which means that the CPU is lower power consuming in those scenarios. The 7950X originally pulled 263 watts at the EPS 12-volt cables with BIOS version 0705, which is the newer of the two that we tested for power consumption for the 7950X. So there's a newer one still for the X3D. The original launch day test had it at 251 watts with the launch day BIOS. The 7950X3D pulled 156 watts on the same motherboard when stock, with an interesting behavior with the older chipset driver that had it at 136 watts. It's clearly
Not utilizing it properly.
underutilized there, with the older driver and the performance matched. So it's not like it got less efficient with the appropriate driver version. Compared to Intel's 295 watts, the 7950X looks efficient in an all-core 100% Blender workload. And now we can look at an efficiency chart to see that. Performance per watt efficiency is up here. This chart is just math. It's a watt-hours equation when factoring in both the time required to complete a task and the energy consumption during that task. The 7950X's original entry had it at 26 watt-hours, and the 7950X3D is at 16.5 watt-hours here. Minimally, it's a lot more efficient in general. It's consuming less power than the 7950X to do this work, despite a score that's not much different. That'll be one of the primary advantages of the X3D for production benchmarks in our testing, since it's uncommon for cache to benefit performance in the workstation applications we use here. However, part of this could be silicon fitness for quality, where not only has more time passed since the original came out, but they may also be binning differently to allow for lower operating voltages, or V-core mostly, which would allow this reduced power consumption. Our first production benchmarks start with Blender, which is also what we used for our efficiency calculation a moment ago. Blender is a 3D modeling and animation tool. We use it internally for even 2D product designs, and we render an animation of this using Cycles Renderer on the CPU. The 7950X leads the chart with a 6-minute render, followed next by the X3D at 6.3 minutes. They're about the same, although there's technically a slight and repeatable lead for the 7950X. That's expected behavior here. The 13900K is next, where the 7950X3D leads by 4%. After this, we run across the 5950X, the prior flagship, at 9 minutes, and that gives the X3D a 32% advantage, or really the non-X3D as well, because they're about the same. Compiling a code base is up next. We can't account for all compiler behavior. Compilers in particular, we've seen behave very differently between different operating systems and use cases.
I don't really
So
care
this is just
about productivity,
representative
so I
of
think
a
we're going to fast
heavier
forward through
Chromium
this.
full compile benchmark. The compile required 36 thermal target that the 7950X would boost to. Now it's 89 degrees. AMD's official statement says this, quote, TJ Max is the max safe operating temperature, not the absolute max temperature. In the Ryzen 7000 series, the processor is designed to run at TJ Max 24/7 without risk of damage or deterioration. But they brought it down to 89 because Vcache is very sensitive to heat, so it's a different situation. The power limit is lower as well. The 7950X 3D TDP is down from 170 watts on the original to 120 watts for the X3D. And then in our power chart earlier, which we'll bring back now, you'll see that we were running over 120, but it's normal for TDP to not equal actual power consumption. That's because the actual socket power, or the PPT limit, is set to 162 watts out of the box versus 230 on the regular 7950X. All this is important because in heterogeneous CPU design, the computer, or more specifically the OS, needs a way to decide what cores to assign tasks to. Intel has two types of cores in its current mainstream CPUs, but that's an easier thing for the OS to judge since it basically boils down to the fact that they're just slow or fast. That's it. If it's a game or other demanding application, assign it to the P cores and you're done.
Ash, on the other
In
hand,
AMD's
is
case, with the 7950X
weird.
3D and the 7900X 3D that we'll review later, it's not that simple. In a perfect world, the OS's scheduler would have knowledge of which applications prefer the extra cache over the raw clock speed. But Windows has no way to know that. If a game or application that prefers cache jumps to the other CCD, or vice versa, it'll create performance problems. AMD's workaround for this is to have Windows park the cores on the second higher clocking CCD, so it's actually disabling the faster cores intentionally when it thinks you're running a game. So you can think of it like a parking lot with parking stalls. It is moving
Which, by the way,
those cores.
while this is a Band-Aid fix, by the way, this is not a solution. This is a Band-Aid fix, and I'm pretty sure Intel does not do this. This is a Band-Aid fix to fix the problem with their fucking Frankenstein here. This is a Band-Aid fix because when you park cores and you unpark the cores, let's say if a program spins up, or more cores are needed, it can cause stuttering. That's why one of the snake oil or background tweaks is actually to turn off core parking. Core parking is bad when you want a responsive system. It's bad. And in the case here, AMD is trying to use a bad system to fix their Frankenstein. Yeah, this is another reason I'm actually leaning towards a 13900K right now.
last 16
Jesus Christ.
into parking spots,
And I might just
so that the rest of the
do a
traffic can
13900K and say
get
fuck it
through and get
until
those cores out of
the
way.
8000
Even though they're
X3Ds come
supposed
out,
to
and
help,
maybe they'll
they
iron out
actually
more of
slow
this shit.
things down if the game can make use of that Vcache, where it needs to be operating on
Crazy.
the CCD with a Vcache to avoid that latency hit. Here's where things get a little interesting. So the mechanism for this to work, AMD's performance optimizer, is Xbox Game Bar, which comes with Windows.
Also, is also something that can have problems. Game bar turning off game bar and overlays is actually something that helps out with performance because they can cause their own slew of issues. But once again, AMD is using a broken system as a band-aid for their fucking Frankenstein. Oh no, guys.
These days. So you need to run that. It needs to be updated. And you also need to run the balanced power profile in Windows, not high performance. AMD
Yeah, I
has
think
historically
at this
recommended
point,
high
guys,
performance.
this is starting to
For
strike me as
X3D,
there's too many
it's best
problems
to
with
run
this to
balanced.
actually.
Otherwise, the cores will not be permitted to park, which will, again, think of it as being in the flow of traffic. They are in the way. And this is also why we think the 7800 X3D will become very interesting.
Yeah,
because
'cause
AMD
it
is
doesn't have any of these
effectively turning
issues.
off half of a $700 CPU to run games faster, whereas the 7800
In a
X3D
Band-Aid
shouldn't
broken
have
system.
to do that. You should just be able to use it because half of a 7950 X3D is kind of the 7800 X3D already. You just lose all the production performance. And finally, traditional overclocking like voltage and frequency configuration is not permitted, at least not over voltage. And you have to do it all through Curve Optimizer or other means. But we'll maybe talk about that more later if it's interesting. So wrapping this up then, generally speaking, the 7950 X3D has been really impressive in gaming workloads, especially or primarily if you turn half of the CPU off, specifically half of the cores, but you leave the cache on. Now, this is not an active thing. You don't have to go through anymore and toggle game mode and not game mode. Used to work that way. It's not how it works now. So if it's been a while, it is now automatic, which is good, as long as you install the latest BIOS and chipset drivers, which we already talked about in the beginning. So the problem comes when you look at it being $700. As a technological feat, this is really impressive. The Vcache is working properly when the games can actually leverage it. So in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where we're seeing 25%
But not always.
differences, that's insane, considering nothing else really has changed, except the frequency a little bit. And then for Final Fantasy, we saw reasonable gains as well. For Total War, Warhammer 3, we saw pretty good gains. So we're in the 10 to 15% range for about half the games. Tomb Raider's an outlier, but really impressive. And then some of the others are worse.
And there isn't really a
Which is
big
expected
uplift in
behavior.
1% and
It just
0.1%
depends
at
on
all here,
what
by
the
the
game
way.
specifically would benefit from. And we tested prefer faster core with Counter-Strike, if you want to go back and check that chart. For production applications,
Does that mean
this
it
doesn't
defaults
make sense. In
for
any of the ones
preferred
we
cache?
test, there's probably something out there that can really leverage the cache. So for example, years ago, we had a compile benchmark before we moved to Chromium, or it was a different Chromium maybe, where we had inadvertently accidentally created a cache benchmark. And the way the benchmark worked was the numbers on the bar would have been in the same order if we literally sorted the data by most cache. So it wasn't really, we ended up getting rid of it as a benchmark for a lot of reasons we described in an old video. But if you can find a real world scenario like that, then yeah, it'll be useful in your production work. Our standard suite does not include one. So for our
I think
production tests,
what's going to happen here
for
is
what
I
we
have to
looked
wait for
at,
that 50-game comparison
this is
from
not
Hardware Unboxed.
any better than a 7950X. And of course, in a lot of cases, you should look at the 3900K as well, because it's better in a good amount of these tests, or at least close enough. So in gaming,
And
the
it's
big thing to
550.
remember is that we think the 7800X3D would have usurped the 7950X3D, except AMD has reduced its frequency hard by 700 megahertz, and you won't be able to overclock it through any official means. So that creates the product segmentation they're looking for. That leaves the 7900X3D, which is close enough in frequency that it could be just as good, and it's not 7900X3D.
Yikes! So they hobbled the 7800X3D, 7800X3D.
Which is close enough in frequency that it could be just as good.
Holy fuck!
And it's no wonder AMD didn't sample it, but it'll depend on that CCD layout and how they split the 12 cores. It may be worth just waiting to see, but if you need to build now or whatever, you just want the best, this is doing what it's supposed to do in gaming. So other CPUs to look at and consider. You know, we're seeing 4% better at best in production workloads versus 7950X, so you should just look at the 7950X if you're a workstation type.
By the way, one of the reasons I don't really like
if you're a
Gamer's
gaming
Nexus
user,
anymore is
the
particularly because they have like
3900K,
6
the
benchmarks,
3600K,
5
and the
game
750X
benchmarks, and that's not enough.
And of course, the 5800X3D is still really impressive.
It's
in a
actually
lot of these
pretty
charts.
poor
In fact,
to
in
get
the
a good
places where
sample
the
size, especially with a weird
7950X3D
chip like this.
punched above where it made sense for AMD to otherwise be, the 58X3D was right there next to it. And for the same reason, they both have this massive amount of cache. So our recommendation to you, if you are more value-oriented, but you're still at the high end, then the 13600K makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like a poser high-end.
And honestly, like I kind of feel
where if you put them next to each other,
I kind of feel like the recommendations they make on Gamer's Nexus kind of almost lose validity, specifically because they only test like 5 games.
Depending on what kind of games you're playing. If you're less price sensitive, then the 7950X3D is dominant in a lot of these charts, with some exceptions giving way to the 13900K. And then if you're in the budget class, you should look at our 13100F review, where we talk about the 12100F as the best option for you. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more and go to store.gamersaccess.net to support our deep dives like this one with in-depth testing and discussion for reviews. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Okay. Sure, huh? World's gonna be terrible. A lot of these reviewers I've never seen before. Bauer. HuB already. I think we're just gonna cross post here. Five or six. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my, 7. You're 7 now? 8? Am I wrong now? They're testing more. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my god, there's 8 games. Oh my god, they've increased the number of games. I think we're gonna take. I'm just gonna look at the bench. I don't care about the
How much
dialogue.
faster can gaming CPUs really get? Because lately, it seems like the progress has been really, really slow. While the rendering and encoding side of things is becoming absolutely unhinged, the gains when it comes to frame rate and gaming are far less inspiring. Well, let's see if or 3000 CPU, then you will definitely see a difference. 5 millisecond faster input, Think of that as the processing latency of the CPU,
About
GPU,
1440p
and
already.
game combined, but this doesn't include the latency of your mouse or your monitor. It's purely how fast your system can prepare and finish rendering a frame. Effectively, you can think of the right side of this graph showing the smoothness of the game and the left side showing the responsiveness. So here in Overwatch 2, yeah, we do see the new Ryzen 7950X 3D right at the top of the chart. However, it is by a very slim margin. A good chunk of these CPUs are running into that 600 FPS
We're gonna
cap,
assume
despite
that
running
they
these
installed the
benchmarks
right
at
drivers.
1440p. Versus the 5800X 3D.
Once again, I've never watched the channel
inputs are
before.
1 millisecond faster on average, and 1% lows are a mere 7 FPS ahead. So barely a gain here at all. If though you're upgrading from a Ryzen 2000 or 3000 CPU, then you will definitely see a difference. 5 millisecond faster inputs and roughly a doubling in frame rate. However, that's also what you'd see if you were to upgrade to the 5800X 3D. In Modern Warfare 2, using the built-in benchmark, I actually found the 5800X 3D to be slightly faster on average compared to the new 7950X 3D. This is also something that I went back and retested, but I kept getting the same result. Very interesting to see for sure, and
Prefer cache burst, prefer frequency, guys, whether or not he has right installed drivers. This is why this is kind of, we don't know. Prefer cache, prefer drivers, or excuse me, prefer cache, prefer frequency, and then in addition to that, having the right drivers installed, right? And then if the game actually sees it as, it has to see it as a game. So you have to manually turn on game mode if it's not turned on already for the game itself because of the bandaids that AMD is using. So, like, you can't even reliably look at benchmarks right now, which is kind of a shame because there's certain things that you need to be aware of, and some of these benchmarkers might not be aware of that might be influencing their performance. And 5800X, for instance, doesn't really have the problem because it's one chip, right? With 7950X 3D, it's 2 chips, and that's where it's creating issues now.
Running 1440p high settings here, the GPU usage for our RTX 4090 was only 83%.
Kid, by the way, is doing Lancy tests. No one else is doing this. I mentioned this before. There's a lot of room for improvement in tech tubing. It's good he's actually testing this, and these are generally multiplayer games. Well, the 2 first ones were multiplayer games. Multiplayer game 2. But no one's doing this. Why are they doing this? Do you have neat little reflex analyzers? No one's using them. What the fuck is this shit?
New 7950X 3D, so there is still some CPU bottlenecking at play. Having said that, everything from the 5800X 3D and upwards basically shows the same experience. Between the old
because
and
he's
new
probably
stuff,
GPU limited.
3.5% improvement on average.
Good.
And PC latency,
which is why you don't test
basically
1440p high. But once again, there are so many. What is this shit? You're testing a CPU. You don't test a GPU bound scenario when you're testing a CPU. You're testing F1 2022 with high settings on 1440p, and you're trying to test the CPU? What happens when the 5090 comes out a year from now? These benchmarks are going to be irrelevant. This is why you test lower resolutions. You test 1080p. Oh my god, the horrible resolution. And even 720p, which no one so far has tested it. TechSpot tested 720p. None of these guys tested it because sometimes you'll run into a GPU bottleneck, which will be eliminated by newer GPUs, which we can safely assume are coming out in 2 years. There's going to be a 5090. We can safely assume that. But here we are, 1440p high. Let's test that fucking GPU bound scenario. Good job. Good job, OptimumTech.
Maybe
you're great.
If we ran this at 1080p medium to low settings, we'd see some more aggressive scaling here, but not even the best sim racers in the world play with those settings. In Valorant, the 7950X 3D finally cracks that 1000 FPS mark on our spike plant simulation with 1% lows over 600 FPS.
Hey, it's on low now, but still 1440p.
There's basically no difference here versus the...
I don't understand, like, they don't consistently test one setting either. Like, there's high, low, and medium here. Why? Why would you do that? Why don't you just test everything on low? What is the purpose of testing everything on just random settings that you just pick out of your asshole? What's the point of that? What's going on here?
800X 3D, especially when the difference in latency is just half a millisecond, but for what it's worth, the 7950X 3D is the faster chip. Now keep in mind if you're playing
0.1%. He also uses the equalizer, by the way. You can tell based on the bass occasionally rumbling.
About the same. We also see surprisingly good scaling in Cyberpunk 2077. Here the new 3D chip was 5% faster on average versus the non-3D part, and 13% faster when it came to the...
Some of these games also have problems with hyperthreading and micro stuttering with hyperthreading. Hyperthreading SMT. And I believe Cyberpunk is one of those games. I believe you had to turn off hyperthreading in the game particularly, otherwise it has issues.
Well, the new 7950X
SMT.
3D almost relieves all CPU bottlenecking with these settings. GPU usage for our
Medium
4090
now,
was 95% on
1440p.
average versus around 92% for the 5800X 3D. Now, there are some instances where Intel's 13900K ends up on top of everything. In Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, I found the 5800X 3D and 7950X 3D to be
1440p.
virtually identical, but then the 13900K ends up 5% faster than both on average. Similar story in Doom Eternal, 13900K out on top, with the new and old 3D V-Cache chips basically pushing the same performance. So there are some instances, just as we saw with the 5800X 3D, where that extra L3 cache doesn't really help a lot. Then in Rainbow Six, even less convincing gains. Here the margin between the top 5 are
1440p, medium.
incredibly slim. But maybe
I guess this is GPU bottleneck.
the biggest difference here out of all of these CPUs is power consumption, and surprisingly the 7950X 3D doesn't pull that much power at all. In Valorant, just 76 watts, and that's also while pushing out 1000
Go to the weird section.
core workloads. So if you're looking for faster processing times, the standard
Productivity, I
come to
guess.
most seems to take about a 5 to 10% penalty versus the non-3D chip. That chip can boost a little bit higher and get a little bit warmer, so do expect more performance. Alright, so the 7800X 3D is probably the one that you want to be waiting for here. To be honest, the 79
And you could have simulated that, which is writing on the wall, by the way. If you kept up with the tech channels, which I assume these guys are because they're in the neighborhood of tech tubing, right? They should have been looking at things like a simulated 7800X 3D, and they didn't. Same thing with also looking at a slightly bloated version of Windows, which no one tested so far that we've looked at, because that will really start fucking with the thread scheduler.
You want the gaming benefits that the 3D
And that matters.
provides, but you also want
I'd even say that matters just normally, putting aside everything else, putting aside how weird these chips are. I think that even matters just in everyday, day-to-day use is a slightly bloated version of Windows, in addition to a sterile version of Windows.
That's what this is trying to serve. But at the same time, you know, the gains that we're seeing, honestly, from the 3D V-Cache this time around, don't seem that impressive as what we saw with the 5800X 3D. And in most cases,
That's because there's
the
weird shit going on
5800X
here.
3D is still there to play. Like, if you currently are on the next one.
Bye. I guess we'll do Paul's Hardware. I've heard of Paul's Hardware before. We're going to fast forward
AMD,
to
what do you do
the
if Intel has a
benchmarks.
faster gaming CPU than you do? Well, that's easy. Just throw cash at the problem. Okay, the time is coming
mean,
again,
they
my
both
friends,
should
when
do this,
one of
and they
the
don't.
two main desktop CPU manufacturers
Design
clears their
bench.
throat and says, improving upon the 7950X's performance enough to outpace the 13900K.
Anything
It's
interesting here?
a very slim lead over the 13900K.
I think they just
As
tested all
expected, the
in.
4K results are
Why is he testing a GPU bot scenario? He's testing four. Is this the only one? No, no way. Okay, no.
cash thing after all.
You aren't just
Next, we
testing
have
4K. You aren't just testing this. There has to be multiple here, right? Okay, there we go. I was looking kind of rough there. Interesting. He's not testing any interesting configurations. Basically everything that I've already seen. It's not even worth testing 4K. I don't know why you would. If anything, you want to test high and low. You don't want to test 1080p and 4K because it's almost direct scaling is between the resolution and performance. Basically, it'll just scale up until it hits the bottleneck on the GPU, and then that's it. There you go. You got your results. Difference would be low versus high because sometimes the settings change and it influences some sort of CPU bound scenario in the background. So low versus high in CPU testing is useful compared to resolution scaling at 1080p versus 4K. Now, in the case of a GPU, when you want to normalize for just what happens to the GPU, resolution scaling is very important from 720p all the way to 8K. That really matters because it's almost a linear increase in performance that has no shenanigans going on in the background that turn things on or off, and especially with high settings. Because then they'll all be comparable. So, once again, there's a lot of things that could be improved upon here, and yep, ultra high preset, okay. You got it. Good for you. Ultra, instead of testing 4K and 1080p here, he should have tested high and low. The highest setting and the lowest setting on 1080p. So they're not CPU bound due to resolution scaling. And instead, maybe there's something weird going on in the background that might influence it. That's just in the testing methodology itself. That's not even in like the inner testing with the CPU itself, such as prefer cache, prefer frequency. The weird shit going on with the parking of cores in the background, whether or not they have the newest drivers, we're going to assume they do because they're tech tubers, but also at the same time, we're seeing shit like this. So, you know, yeah, there is a lot of fucking things tech tubers could do to improve their shit, and they don't. Like I said, I actually, at one point, I was considering being a tech reviewer, not necessarily a tuber, but probably nowadays a tuber, a tech tuber, particularly because it seems like a lot of people have a lot of inconsistencies with their testing methodology, and then at the same time, they don't test the right things all the time, and it shows. Generally just showing the 3900K being better. I'm going to the end of the benchmarks because that's where the 1080p is. And it still looks like this is GPU bound. Might not be though. There might just be. Sometimes games are weird where they're neither CPU nor GPU bound, and they're just bottlenecked by shit code in the background. Is what it happens. Like I think Flight Simulator's that way. It really likes the cache though. Yeah, there's a lot of things they could have tested here. Prefer cores, prefer frequency. Turning off and on core parking in general, although I think that might be just similar to old driver results that Gamers Nexus had. I don't know on that though. Simulated 7800X3D obviously being an interesting one, and then a simulated 7900X3D would also be another one. But my guess is the benchmarks for the 7900X3D are going to follow tomorrow or later today because they go on sale this morning, and at that point, basically, it's the shackles come off. So my guess is we're going to see 7900X3D benchmarks at about 8 this morning, or maybe tomorrow. They'll come off on Wednesday instead.
Hit 108.4 FPS, that's 40 into, then you should definitely get the 7950X or the 13900K over the 7950X 3D. I think that was safe to assume even before this launch happened. But what can I say to wrap up? I'm very glad that AMD and Intel are leapfrogging each other with their launches in the past year or two in terms of peak gaming CPU performance, because competition is our best bet to keep prices from running away like they have in the GPU space. Practically speaking though, the 7950X 3D is a bit of a niche product. At $700, you need to be in a position to make use of the cores and threads available, but also really seeking out good gaming performance at the same time for it to make sense. Budget-minded, gaming-focused builders will probably be more comfortable sticking to the 5800X 3D or waiting 5 to 6 weeks for the 7800X 3D to launch, which I'm anticipating will have very similar gaming performance to this one while costing a lot less. There's the 7900X 3D too, but
not really, as we saw with Hardware Unboxed.
Out for that one, so we'll have
these guys do this for a living. These guys do this for a living, and they don't understand that there's differences in how the cache works and how it's prioritized in Windows on the chips themselves, right? And it's going to change how Windows juggles the shit in the background. And it's not always going to work out in an optimal scenario, which could be seen with Hardware Unboxed review, and which you could hypothesize even before this happens, because both chiplets are not created equal. It's not just a frequency difference. It is a cache difference and a frequency difference. And Windows trying to figure out what to do with it isn't always the best case scenario. So yeah, it's kind of weird to say, oh, it's just going to be the same. It's not going to be the same thing. The 7800X3D is definitely going to probably be the better choice here. 7900X3D is just going to be a shitbird, and 7950X3D is going to have driver issues. So basically, these are like, yeah, you are getting the two worst picks to begin with, and one is going to look like a good pick because you're just going to assume that they're going to function the same, which is what this guy just did, and which I would not agree with. We aren't even going to look at the rest of this conclusion. Yeah. Techsters. I've never seen Techsters. Oh my god, a growl. Is this why we watch Techsters? Because there's a growl? I'm going to go take a piss, guys, and we're going to continue on with this wonderful scenario. We're back. And then we'll look at TechSpot again. TechSpot probably has done some of the best benchmarking. I got some of these for Christmas, guys, and I still haven't ate them before. They're wasabi almonds. Oh, you can't see the green package. They're actually pretty good. Got them from my dad. Oh, I got to get some water, too. Pretty good. I think what's going to happen here is I need to either wait for the 7800X3D or buy a 7950X3D, which is $700. And 13900K might be exactly what I'm looking for because it's $550 and gets very similar results to the 7950X3D. Let's look at the Grail. Do people just watch her because she's a Grail, or is she doing something that no one else is doing besides being a Grail? What do you guys think?
AMD is finally launching the Ryzen 7000 series X3D.
Oh my god, flowers. Oh yeah.
Groot,
that cute things.
Ryzen 9 7950 X3D should be the absolute fastest gaming CPU that money can buy while using less power than its direct competitors.
Benchmarks are very
a
unimpressive.
Big claim to make. So we spent the last couple of weeks testing it in 25 different games on 3 different
They had weeks to do this?
And in this video,
I've heard no one else mention
how
timelines, by the way.
It performs in games, as well as when it comes to productivity, and how power efficient it actually is. Let's begin. The new X3D processors are in many ways similar
Oh my god,
to the
pink and
existing
flowers. Wow.
7000X processors with one big difference. The X3D comes with a big chunk of AMD
That's a
3D
that's a
V-cache.
big finger.
Now they did this with the previous generation Ryzen 7 5800 X3D, and it turned out that extra cache can really help to improve gaming performance specifically.
I
So
kind of
now
want
we're
to
adding the
hear
same
her
thing to
take
the
on
Ryzen
it,
9
but at the
models
same
as
time,
well.
like we've already
But
covered a
the
couple reviews
interesting
here. I
thing
think what we're gonna do is
that
we're gonna
while
fast
Ryzen
forward.
750 X3D to the Ryzen 9 7950X. So let's start with
Blender.
some pure
Okay, benchmarks.
in Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is a notoriously CPU-heavy game, the 7950
I really hope that I don't need to go through and see whether or not they have the latest drivers installed, because they really need to, right? They really need to have everything up to date, as already has been shown and showcased by the other game testers, Techtubers, and B, if they actually mention. So even if I went through the entire review, if they actually mentioned that the drivers are up to date or drivers at all, which probably aren't based on what we've seen so far. There's fast and loose with tech tubing.
50 X3D starts off really well. Average frame rates are much better than on the 7950X, and it is beating the i9 3900K as well. 1% lows, which you can see in the brackets.
I mean, there's only
not
three
much better,
CPUs
but it is
here, but
still an improvement overall. Watch Dogs Legion
I guess they're
seems
the
to
ones that you're
really
actually
benefit
comparing
from
to,
the
so.
3D cache as well, showing more than 30% of an improvement
Testing
over
high?
both the older AMD
Okay.
chip and the i9 on 1080p. But even on high resolutions that are more GPU bound, we can see a significant benefit here. Far Cry 6 shows the same story. We see huge gains on 1080p,
mention
1440p,
of core
and even 4K
versus
resolution
frequency,
compared to both other
prefer core
CPUs.
versus prefer
Shadow of the
frequency.
Tomb Raider has the old 7950X behind Intel by quite a margin.
I don't even
The
tech tube, and I
X3D
already know that you have to
overtakes it
turn
on
off
both
the
1080p
or
and
turn on game mode
1440p.
if it's
Intel
not
does hold
properly
up better on 4K
activated.
resolution. In Borderlands 3, the things look more like I would expect them
I think
to
this is what we're seeing right now,
beforehand.
some
There is
teething
a nice
issues.
improvement on 1080p, but as the resolution goes up, the GPU becomes the bottleneck here. Still, it was enough to beat the 3900K on all 3 resolutions. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that really favored Intel in the past. I mean, you can see the gaps between the i9 and the 7950X, but the X3D has improved that performance by a lot, making AMD way more competitive in this title, even if Intel is still ahead.
But there's
by a
also the
little bit.
5800 X3D,
Outriders shows
which,
another nice win
have
for AMD,
performed
especially
similarly.
at low resolutions where it beats the i9 easily. On 4K though, it is basically a tie. And it is about the same in World War Z. We see some improvements.
She's testing
on
all these games
1080p
other
and
people aren't, and she's
1440p,
testing more
and a
games.
small
So
improvement on
I could
4K,
actually,
which does
like,
result
I think comparable data points here, if you want to limit and just test more games and have less data points, because obviously it takes longer to test, 5800X3D would really, really, really have been appropriate here in addition to these other CPUs, because it's also one of the CPUs that has a really big cache. So 5800X3D 100% should have been on these benchmarks as well. And in addition to that, I would actually say other data points are prefer frequency versus prefer cache, as well as a simulated 7800X3D are at bare minimum an essential here. And no one's doing all those things at once. TechSpot did not test the simulated 7800X3D. They just tested the prefer cache and prefer frequency. And then at the same time, they also did a PBO overclock small, which I would actually really like that too, but I don't think that's essential. But then at the same time, they also do not have good 1% and 0.1% in their benchmarks, which is something I also think is essential. Here, we just have average FPS. This is early 2000s benchmarking here. You can't see the whole picture from just average FPS, and it's very easy to test 0.1%, 1% with MSI Afterburner. I can do it personally in game all the time, and I do it daily. So the lack of 1% and 0.1% in testing, I think, is unforgivable at this point, even though she tested 25 games. Or Techsters, I don't know if it's a group of people. Even though she tested 25 games, the fact that she has not included 0.1%, 1%, prefer frequency versus prefer cores, and then testing weird scenarios like 7800X3D, which people really want to see and really want to know, I think is also very weird. And also 1500X3D should be on the charts here because that's a good comparison point for most people nowadays. Even though it's not comparing to, they have like the two, right? 7900, 7950, and 13900K is the comparable one. And it would be nice to have more testing points. But there are certain scenarios that need to be tested here because they're very applicable to the chip they're actually buying. And putting aside the fact there's no 1%, 0.1%.
In AMD looking better overall. The Division 2 is another game that really preferred Intel before, but
by the way, I tried this out. This is actually really good.
for AMD,
This is the
especially
Zero
on
one.
1080p
Unfortunately, they did
and
not have the
1440p.
sugar one in stock,
Intel
and I
does
really
have a
wanted to
small
try the
win on
sugar one.
4K, but AMD
But this is
does
actually really
go
good.
from
Dr.
a clear
Pepper
loss
Zero
to
in
a
general is
clear
pretty
win
good,
in this
but the
style.
strawberry and cream
Rainbow
one is
Six
also very
Siege
good.
is a game that actually preferred Ryzen already, and this X3D just takes it up a notch. Not that it matters much given the crazy high frame rates, but if you're really into this game, I guess you will be ready for a 480Hz gaming monitor. Spider-Man Remastered also clearly favored Intel,
Wait.
and
Is the 160 the 1%? They didn't actually, did she say this at some point? Because there's two numbers here, right? This is average? Is this the 1% lows here? Because there's no labels on the chart here, because I guess labels are bad. Except for the labels here. Labels are bad. I assume this is lows? Or 0.1%? I assume this is 1% because of how high it is.
games. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is a notoriously CPU-heavy game, the 7950 X3D starts off really well. Average frame rates are much better than on the 7950X, and it is beating the i9 13900K.
Maybe I just talked about the
as
oh
well.
my ass.
1% lows, which you can see
Okay,
in the bracket,
so that is
the
1%
i9
lows.
easily.
Okay.
On 4K though, it is basically a tie. And
This was a fucking. So now she's not testing 1% lows. Why? What happened? There were 1% lows. There's 1% lows in Cyberpunk. There's no 1% lows in Borderlands. Why? Why are you doing this? Fucking Gamers Nexus sometimes does this too, where they just remove 0.1% from their game benchmarks. What? What is going on here? Why would you test 1% or in some games and not in other games? Why? Like, MSI Afterburner works in all games and you get 0.1%. What is going on here, guys? What is happening? Why does this look the way that it does? I see. So this is why I assumed. This is why I was talking about there being no 1%, because sometimes there aren't 1%.
resolutions. Cyberpunk
Always
2077 is
1%.
a game that really favored Intel in the past. I mean, you can see the gaps between the i9 and the 7950X, but the X3D has improved that performance by a lot,
Guys want some wasabi
making
almonds?
AMD way more competitive in this title, even if Intel is still ahead by a little bit. Outriders shows another nice win for AMD, especially at low resolutions where it beats the i9 easily. On 4K,
My guess is 1% and 0.1% are removed for these things because they don't make sense and they're not consistent and they don't test them enough to actually be confident in their numbers. If I had to gauge stuff, my guess is they were getting inconsistent 1% numbers. And rather than listing it, they decided that they didn't have enough data points to list them. So, yeah, they just didn't. Same thing with 0.1% because 0.1% can have a lot of fluctuations. But the more you test, the more runs you do, the more consistent and more confidence you'll have in those numbers.
though, it is basically a tie. And it is about the same in World War Z. We see some improvements on 1080p and 1440p, and a small improvement on 4K, which does result in AMD looking better overall. The Division 2 is another game that really preferred Intel before, but the X3D really improved things for AMD, especially on 1080p and 1440p. Intel does have a small win on 4K, but AMD does go from a clear loss to a clear win in this title. Rainbow Six Siege is a game that actually preferred Ryzen already, and this X3D just takes it up a notch. Not that it matters much, given the crazy high frame rates, but if you're really into this game, I guess you will be ready for a 480Hz gaming monitor. Spider-Man Remastered also clearly favored Intel, and the X3D yet again closed that gap to a more reasonable amount, even if Intel still wins overall, especially when it comes to 1% lows. Gotham Knights is an unoptimized mess of a game, and AMD was really struggling here before, but once again, the X3D is able to bring performance back in line with its Intel competitor. In Dirt 5, AMD also improved their lead on 1080p and 1440p resolutions, with the 1% lows in particular being a notable improvement over Intel. Formula 1 2022 shows a much smaller difference overall. There is an okay improvement at 1080p, but it's very close on 1440p and 4K resolutions, where the X3D is actually behind the 7950X and the 13900.
Also, I don't like how they do the 1% here. I think having another bar, or having a bar inside of a bar is a much better way of doing it. What other tech tubers do.
100K. In Tiny Tina Wonderlands, all three CPUs are really close. Intel's 1% lows on 1080p are worth pointing out, but other than that, you won't really notice a real difference between any of these results. Troy Total War also shows pretty minor improvements. There's a small gain on lower resolutions, partially closing the gap with Intel, but it is not as big as in some other games. Assassin's Creed Valhalla shows the same story. There are some small gains, but it does help AMD get in line with Intel instead of being behind it. And in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, we barely see any gain at all, and Intel is still ahead across all three resolutions.
You'd be able to tell right now, by the way, if the problem is the fact that the chiplet only has one cache, only one of the chiplets has a cache on it. If they tested the 5800 X3D, you'd be able to tell right away whether or not this is the cache issue because of the weird asymmetrical design, or if this is just the way that 3D cache functions in these games. You can't tell because they didn't test the 1500 X3D. This is why it's important. And also the same thing with, they could have surmised the same thing with the 79 or 7800 X3D simulated benchmark, because that would tell us immediately. Unless, of course, that's also wrong, because
Dying Light
it's
2
simulated.
is interesting because it only shows small gains in average FPS, but
Give you
the
a better
1%
idea
lows are actually
than not having it.
significantly better on 1080p and 1440p. Wolfenstein Youngblood is another somewhat boring result. There is a small improvement on 1080p, but there are no real differences on 1440p and 4K resolution. Just like in Dying Light 2, God of War also stands out because of the improved 1% lows on lower resolutions, even if the average frame rate is either the same or lower than on the 7950X. Anno 1800 doesn't seem to benefit from the Vcache at all, showing very similar numbers, but it is still ahead of...
Can't tell if this is, by the way, because the way how weird the 7900 series X3D chips are, because of how they're designed. There's a lot of weird nuances that have to be taken into account here, and you can't tell if the X3D cache just is kind of broken, and it's not prioritizing the game properly, or if this is an inherent flaw with like they don't get see any benefit at all with extra D cache. And you can't tell because they don't have you don't have data points here to compare the extra cache to non-cache models, or extra cache compared to a working known model like 1500 X3D, or alternatively a simulated 7800 X3D.
The 3900K on all 3 resolutions. Red Dead Redemption 2 also doesn't seem to care about cache much, with once again pretty similar results as before. And while most games have shown some form of an improvement, this isn't the case for every game I've tested. Doom Eternal is one example where the X3D simply performs worse than the 7950X, which was already behind the 13900K.
Once again, you don't know if it's functioning properly because you don't have another data point here that you know is working.
And CSGO is an even worse example where the X3D is actually behind the 7950X by almost
Makes sense because
10%.
CSGO really likes
But again,
frequency.
with these frame rates, it doesn't really matter that much. But let's merge all this into a nice summary per resolution. So if I compare the 7950 X3D to the 7950X on 1080p resolution, the new processor looks pretty impressive. It is faster in 20 out of 25 titles, with 12 of them showing a significant win of 10% or more. It is technically slower in 4 games, but the only significant loss is in CSGO, which still runs extreme frame rates. On average, the X3D is about 11% faster. I know that a lot of CPU tests focus only on 1080p resolution, but with current generation
think she's German?
GPUs,
I'd agree.
many games are held back by CPU performance even on 1440p. 18 out of 25 games show an improvement with the X3D, with 10 games showing a difference of 10% or more. I mean, seeing games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Flight Simulator gain 25% FPS
7950 X3D leads
just by
what?
changing the CPU is
The
pretty
7900.
impressive. Overall, the X3D is 8.4.
This is fucking weird. Why is she comparing the 7950 X3D to the 7950X when she should be comparing it to the 13900K? That's what people are actually considering buying versus, right? I guess you'd be considering this if you're looking for the extra cache instead of buying just a normal 7950X, I guess, if you didn't really realize it already. Like, these are game summaries. This isn't productivity. This would be something you look at if you're deciding whether or not you want to have improved productivity, right? Maybe we'll see a 3900K comparison here in a sec.
4% ahead of the 7950X. On 4K resolution, things are a little bit more balanced between the two, but 5 games do show a significant win of 5% or more, while the 7950X only has 1 win of more than 5%. On average, the X3D is ahead by 1.4%.
This is better than
which
some of the
is
tech tubers we watched, but
technically a
still
win, but
not
you
anywhere
still
close to
shouldn't
hardware
expect
unboxing
that
Gamers Nexus.
extra cache will change that much on this resolution. Compared to the 3900K on 1080p, it does get quite close,
There
but
we
it is
go.
still a win for AMD overall. The 7950 X3D wins in 14 out of 25 games, with 11 games by 5% or more. Meanwhile, Intel wins in 11 games, and in 7 of those by 5% or more. Now that puts AMD ahead by 4.4% on average across 25 games I've tested. On 1440p, AMD again beats Intel in 14 out of 25 games, and in 10 of those by 5%.
I don't even know why it's worth covering
Meanwhile,
1440p and
Intel wins
4K.
in 10
It would be
titles,
high
but
versus low,
only
by
in
the way, the
3
highest
of
settings
those
and the lowest
by
settings in the game.
5% or more. On average, AMD is ahead by
1440p and
3.6%,
4K.
which is not a huge margin, but still not bad.
It's
for
just kind of pointless to
1440p
cover this because it
resolution.
basically is
On
just eating
4K,
up
though, the
GPU
graph flips
benchmark or
slightly
GPU bottleneck.
in Intel's favor. Both CPUs have 5 games where they win by 5% or more, but now Intel does have a slight
Yeah, I should start tech
advantage
tubing,
in
guys.
the
Maybe that's
majority
my life
of
calling.
games. That
Is stop
20%
streaming
gap in
games.
Far Cry 6 does help AMD to keep the average up, which leaves a teeny tiny gap of only 0.2% between the two CPUs, which is practically a draw. But this is where it gets really interesting. Looking at the CPU power consumption when gaming, starting with 4K resolution, where
think most
performance
gamers,
is
although
very similar.
that isn't to say
between
efficiency
the
doesn't
three
matter.
CPUs,
I don't think most
the
gamers
new
give a shit about this. This is
7950
something that matters if you're doing
is
data centers,
significantly more
if you're limited by
efficient.
batteries.
It is using only 85 watts of power on average compared to the 122 watts for the 7950X
I don't
and
care.
132 watts for the 13900K. And this is in a very GPU-heavy scenario. On 1080p,
I'd actually be kind of curious whether or not you
we
can
are
unlock more
CPU
performance
bottlenecked,
by
that gap becomes
removing
really
the
big. Now,
power
technically,
bottleneck
the
here.
3900K is outputting a few frames more in this particular title, but it is also using 185 watts to do so compared to the 99 watts on the 7950 X3D, and that is a ridiculous power difference for a very similar performance. Even compared to the 7950X, the X3D manages to offer a lot more FPS while using about 35 watts less. And that power consumption carries over into non-gaming.
I got most of what I needed out of there by looking at our benchmarks. OptimumTech at least tests latency. That's kind of neat. No one does that. Kitguru, let's take a look. Kitguru is an old hardware review website. They're around the tech report days. That doesn't mean they ever did it well, though.
Shiny AMD Ryzen.
Oh, lyrically you explain
9
stacking problems so far.
The future. The problem, as Luke discovered with the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D, to date the only 3D cache model of processor on the market, is that it's very hit and miss. Feel free to make jokes about missed cache in the comments below. If we take some of the charts from my recent Core i7 13700K review, you can see that in Cinebench R23, the Ryzen 7 3D is right at the bottom of the chart.
You just don't like
Falls
games.
even below the regular Ryzen 7 5800.
How did you end up on Twitch if
In
you
a
don't like
handbrake
games?
conversion test using H.264, once again the 3D is at the bottom of the chart. But in gaming,
My
we
fingers
see
had a lot of
something
seasoning on
quite
them.
different.
That was good.
In Borderlands 3 at
Oh,
1080p,
my eyes are watering
the
now.
Ryzen 7 3D is at the top of the chart. Far Cry 6 at 1080, however, has the Ryzen 7 3D towards the bottom of the chart, while
Cover
Shadow
1%.
of the Tomb Raider
See,
at 1080
this is much less confusing when you cover 1% and 0.1% and average FPS because of the double bar approach. Love it.
1080p has the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D right at the top. In other words, it's all well and good installing extra L3 cache, whether it's stacked or otherwise, but the system has to understand how to make use of that cache.
You sure you wanted to
Otherwise,
stream at one point?
It's no good at all.
Yeah.
It's taken a little while to lay the groundwork for this review, but the background matters. AMD told us they had verified one BIOS for motherboards from Asus, ASRock,
Use
MSI,
iron his shirt.
and Gigabyte.
And probably could
They
use a
sent
bigger one.
us this Asus ROG Crosshair X670E
But
Hero,
that doesn't really matter if
which
what he's
is a
doing,
very
he does
fine
well. So
example. They also sent us an extensive user guide telling us how we should prepare our new system ready for benchmarking. I'm going to run through this at some pace because the length of it is extraordinary and the detail is quite eye-watering. The important thing is that we get the 3D Vcache Performance Optimizer driver and the PPM provisioning file drivers running. The starting point is that we need a BIOS that supports the processor. And then in the BIOS, if we choose, we can manually change dynamic preferred cores or
this is prefer cache, prefer frequency. It wasn't just default to cache or frequency. You can pick it. You can pick this in the you can pick this in the BIOS. And Gamerz Nexus Hardware Unboxed did neither of this. So it doesn't just default to cache, it defaults to driver. And frequency and cache can be explicitly set.
we can leave it
Yeah.
on auto. By running msinfo32.
I guess you could watch IRL streamers. IRL streamers being you watch Amaranth all the time. That's okay, Slane.
Enabled. Previously with AMD, you probably wanted to leave this feature disabled. Verify that game mode is on, i.e. we turn off background. Disabled is enabled. Previously with AMD, you probably wanted to leave this feature disabled. Verify that game mode is on, i.e. we turn off background services. Update the Xbox game bar. Install the AMD chipset driver that supports the
How much do you fucking want to bet? Some of the reviewers we just watched didn't do all this shit. How much you want to bet that they didn't do all this shit? What? Hardware Unboxed, Gamerz Nexus didn't even comment on the switch to explicitly set frequency or cache. Gamers Nexus said that they set frequency in one of their games, but then they didn't test frequency in cache. They only tested the default mode across the board. And they're supposedly some of the best tech tubers, and Unboxed didn't even reference this at all.
3D cache processor, and then check in Device Manager the AMD PPM provisioning file is installed. Also,
I mean, technically, Amaranth is
3D
outdoors in her
Cache
pool.
Performance Optimizer is installed. Within services,
Making
verify the
1.5 million a month.
3D Cache Performance Optimizer service
good for her.
is running. And as belt and braces, verify the AMD 3D Cache
Crazy.
user.exe.
This is so many bandaids stocked on top of bandaids here. By the way, almost none of the tech tubers we watched just now actually covered all the shit that you have to go through, except for this guy. Gamers Nexus went over it to a little extent, but they didn't actually go into specifics beyond just saying you have to install the drivers.
Is running. I'm not going to try to read out this particular line of code, but do this thing. Then you use the Win and G keys to open the Xbox Game Bar app and check it's up to date. And within the Xbox Game Bar app, you verify the KGL version loaded is the same as the KGL service version. This was absolute Greek to me. I still don't know what KGL stands for. If you choose within the Xbox Game Bar app, you can use
Some sort of library they probably use
to
internally.
ensure that any chosen piece of software is remembered as a game. And then we get
You're
a
not shooting,
breakdown
man.
of
What the
how
fuck does
the
that mean?
AMD 3D Cache Performance Optimizer driver actually works in the software stack.
Thread scheduling uses CPC highest performance values, which may change during runtime. The CPC highest performance change. So they're now dynamically adjusting how Windows views which cores are the fastest while the OS is running. This is like fucking band-aids tied together with duct tape. Holy fucking shit. I have CPC turned off because Windows will oftentimes just load up. It will load up whatever core you have with just everything. And just whatever's the fastest core, just load up with garbage. Which actually helped me out. It reduced stuttering for me. Which is insane. It shouldn't do that.
In other words, it's a series of steps. If any link in the chain breaks, the whole thing fails. It so happens the motherboard we are sent by AMD did not have the verified and approved BIOS installed.
Yeah?
But I thought, what the heck?
I mean, that's not a bad
Let's
stance to take.
Experiment. Build a system with a 3D processor. And so I did. Installing the chipset drivers appeared to go fine, although I noted the
All right, Leo.
3D cache driver was not part of the process. And looking in Device Manager, the 3D cache was clearly absent. Task Manager also failed to show the AMD 3D cache.
What?
But what the heck, let's press ahead and try running Cinebench R23, which did not work. And similarly, opening Ryzen Master did not work. I had a word with AMD, they confirmed I did indeed need the new BIOS, so I installed it. With BIOS 9922 replacing 9908, I went to Device Manager and I now had some new unknown devices, one of them being the 3D Vcache device, the other being the integrated graphics in the processor, which had previously been absent. Installing the chipset drivers once again, we now had 3D Vcache Performance Optimizer driver. And once that was installed, Device Manager looked exactly as we expected. And now we could run through the setup list and check that things like the Xbox Game Bar were indeed updated and everything was ready for benchmarking. Let's take a look at the test setup I've been using for my benchmarking. So the motherboard as described, Asus ROG Crosshair X670E Hero. Power supply, Seasonic Vertex GX 1200. That's an ATX3 power supply, which will become significant in just a moment. SS memory combo. Ryzen 9 by swapping the hold down. Mention him reviews, and Luke has done his Zen 4 reviews. So to AMD. With the system idling, it pulls a rather disappointing 130 watts, of which 51 watts is going to the CPU. We're going to start with a quick run in Blender to see how the ASUS treats the Ryzen 9 7950X. This is not the processor that Luke has reviewed, it's a fresh sample sent to me by AMD. As soon as the CPU comes under load, it's immediately fed 205 watts. The system's pulling 335 watts. One core complex is running at 5.1 GHz and the other at 4.85 GHz. The temperature in Borderlands generates an impressive average frame rate of 143 FPS and a minimum of 112 FPS. In Borderlands, 8 FPS, and in shutting the system down, power idle, but it's still high, 121 watts for the system.
Not impressed with
43 for the CPU.
Leo's
In
benchmarking
Blender,
methodology
the
here
ASUS is treating
and
the
lack of
Ryzen
data
9
points
3D
and
with much
charts.
more care than its non-3D friend.
Leo, please.
148 watts package
For the
power,
love of God, Leo.
and the temperature is a mere 75 Celsius, 20 Celsius cooler than the non-3D, and very little difference in clock speed. So let's see how this 3D cache behaves in gaming. Far Cry 6 at 1440p, ultra settings, and this time the average is 178 FPS versus 143, and the minimum is 133 FPS versus 112. It's a similar story in Borderlands 3 at 1440p. The average is 177 FPS, and the minimum 135 FPS. Clearly this 3D cache is having a significant effect, so let's get to the charts. Cinebench R23 multi-core. I've plugged my new data into the old data that we have. This is a pure CPU test, so that should be absolutely fine. At the top of the chart I have Luke's original Ryzen 9 7950X drawing 215 watts and howling along at 38,500 marks. Behind that, Core i9 13900K, then my sample of the Ryzen 9 7950X pulling 205 watts, running at the same speed as Luke's, but scoring significantly lower. I do not understand that. I'm giving you the information as I have it. Just behind that, we have the 7950X 3D, pulling much less power, running slightly slower, and scoring slightly lower than my 7950X sample. Power consumption. In Cinebench, we can see the 7950X.
So I think he's
3D
comparing to
using
his
watts. A regular 7950X needs just over 200.
other co-workers'
Intel
results
is
on
up there
Kitguru
in the
website.
Mid 250s, 260s, and we've seen them run as high as 300. AMD much more efficient than Intel. CPU temperature running on the Corsair 360 AIO. The new 3D model 75 Celsius. We're just looking at Core i9 13900K, Ryzen 9 7950X, and Ryzen 9 7950X 3D.
Badass preset of 1440p, huh?
Badass settings. At the top of the chart by a healthy margin, it's the new 3D. Best part of 20 frames ahead of its non-3D compatriot. Borderlands 3 at 1080, the 7950X 3D at the top of the charts by a significant margin, then the Core i9, and then the regular Ryzen 9. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy at 1440, very high image quality setting. Blimey, there's a big gap between these processors. The new 3D at the top of the chart by a significant margin. And it's the same story on Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy at 1080. The 3D is stomping the field. Far Cry 6 at 1440, ultra preset. The 3D's at the top of the chart by a very small margin over the Core i9 13900K. In fact, if we look at the 1% low, you could easily argue the Core i9's done a better job. The point here is the regular Ryzen 9's trailing behind, so the new cache technology is really helping. Far Cry 6 at 1080. At the top of the field, it's the new 3D, and then we have the Core i9, and then a long way behind, the regular Ryzen 9 7950X. Hitman 3 at 1440 Ultra Preset, the new 3D at the top of the chart. 10 frames behind we have the Core i9, a long way behind we have the regular Ryzen 9. Hitman 3 at 1080, at the top of the chart it's a close tie on average between the Core i9 and the 3D, and then when you look at 1% low, it's a clear win for the Core i9. However, the regular Ryzen 9 is trailing behind. Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1440. How old is this game now? Look at these monumental frame rates though. It's the new Ryzen 9 7950X 3D at the top of the chart, just breaking through the 300 FPS.
1% are about the
Core
same.
i9 255. The original Ryzen 9
Nope.
221.
I don't think
These
TechSpot
aren't
does
huge numbers.
TechTubing,
Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080.
but I'd say they've
very
done one of the
similar
better
frame rates to
benchmarking results here.
1440. The 3D wins. Watch Dogs Legion at 1440 Ultra preset. It's a fairly close battle, but the 3D wins.
Yeah. Bye, Leo.
Better than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Everyone's testing these. Oh, they did the 5800 X3D instead of the 7900. Data points you need. It's not all the data points. Some of these you can test even before these benchmarks come out, or before the chip comes out. You can basically pre-test this shit. What are you doing? What are you doing? What does Slane have you doing in the background, computer? I thought so. Fuck off. Saw you. I saw you back here. What are you doing in the background? I saw that. I saw that shit. Oh, dude, I couldn't fucking do a podcast with the CPU already. That's trying to milk it too much. 18K views. 6K. Hardware Canucks is another website that's been around for ages. Bauer just doing different things. Yeah. Holy shit. We're not going to watch the whole thing. Let's take a look at Hardware Canucks here. We're just going to skip to their hardware benchmarking.
All right, guys, so today is the day that everybody is allowed to start talking about the performance about
Coolers.
AMD's Ryzen 7000
Power
X
consumption.
series. So all these coolers are able to keep temperatures below 65 degrees. And yeah,
About
that
their
even goes
temperatures?
for the AG400 running at just 50% fan speed. There is a pretty big 13-degree delta here, though. Please let
Not
good people.
What? It was just about the cooler? The fuck? What are you doing? Okay. Yeah, benchmarks come out and they're talking about the cooler. Or how cooler runs. Okay. Let's see who this guy is.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is an incredibly exciting day.
He's
because
excitable.
in my hands, I have the brand new X3D
Does he have charts
chip
anywhere?
From AMD. This is just going to be to walk.
Doesn't have any formal charts. He just talks about stuff while having an overlay in the background.
The one people care about the most has got to be Warzone. So he's going to give you.
Okay, worthless.
No,
Worthless testing. Worthless testing. This is like looking at a CNET review. Okay. Yep. Now we're just going to take your word on this, I guess, based on all of his testing you did and didn't show on screen. That was a waste of time. PC World, I imagine, is going to be bad. Moore's Law, I think, has been around for a while as well.
So today, AMD launched the in more than just a couple of games. Although I do have to say that it's rarely by much when
Are they
Intel does
just
win.
aggregating?
It
This is what I
actually
do.
seems like a lot of the time that the RAM having issues with it's already not requiring 15 minutes free for lunch, whether you're working.
Yeah, got to add. All right, that was a waste of time too. Let's take a look. I took a look at TechSpot. Let's take a look at Tomshardware. They're still around. Tomshardware used to be pretty shit. I don't normally look at. These are pretty good. Wasabi almonds guys are pretty great. It's pretty enjoyable. Yep. see. Skip the hardware bench. I like how they don't have a page pull down here. You just look at numbers. I guess you want to make people go through every one of your pages. You don't give them the page numbers, or you give them the subject, right? For obviously more ad revenue. So nothing that we've seen so far after watching Hardware Unboxed or Gamers Nexus has really changed my mind on really anything that's going on here. TLDR. Geometric mean, 1080p, Windows 11. Average, 1440p. Give me those 1%. 11. So they tested Windows 10 and Windows 11, which is also still another variable in here. What is it, 226, 202? 200, 226, 200. These are too small, by the way. It performs better in Windows 11 than it does in Windows 10. '99th percentile. That's not what we want. We want 1% lows. 99th percentile is dumb. Actually, I think they consider 99th percentile to be 1% lows. 99th percentile used to cut out the lows, by the way, which is why I had a problem with it. It wasn't the 1% lows, it was when it cuts out the lows. Because it gives more consistent numbers when you cut out the outliers. Cut off the tail ends. EBO, what is Expo? 5157. Windows 11. Only tests 99th percentile in Windows 11. I think Expo is the memory timing settings. Test 1% or 0.1%, 1% in Windows 10, only in Windows 11, or showed the data for it. All games. Cyberpunk 1080p Ultra. Good for them. Gotta find a GPU bottleneck wherever you can. Not have DX version of Windows is this? Tell you in which version of Windows this is. Unless it's somewhere else in this garbage I'm not going to read. Skimming. Oh my god, go to page. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Their graph presentation has a lot to be desired. Only tested Hitman 3 in 1080p, but not 1440p? Okay. What? Why? Why do you have other benchmarks that are in 1440p then? Now they're back to testing 1440p. Okay. Maybe they ran out of time, guys. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a very weird game, by the way. It's no surprise that there's weird benchmarks for it, or weird numbers for it. And it's showing a huge advantage to the X3D cache. Maybe I'll get a 7950 X3D, guys. I'd rather buy a 7800 X3D. But you have to maybe wait a month, and it might actually turn into one of these cases where it actually can use other cores properly. Or it could be that I'm just opting in to basically alpha product, which is not something you want. You don't want a beta test, right? Alpha product's even earlier than that. Maybe the 7000 series, 7900 series, 7950 is alpha. Which would be kind of a pain in the ass, if you ask me. Alternatively, I could just get a 13900K and save money. Uh-huh. Holy jeebus. I love when you're offered options and none of them look palatable. Like the 5800 X3D was a no-brainer, except it came out like a year, maybe not a year, 6 months before the 7000 series did. But then this came out 6 months after that, so yeah. %1 regression here. Extras. What are extras? Seeing some large deltas in our test suite, we wanted to expand on view to a few more game titles we don't normally test. As such, we threw these together in a quick table. Okay. This is actually easier to read than those charts are, by the way. Plus 21%, plus 21, plus 24, plus 21. but also does not include 1%. Okay. Let's read. Did they have something particular to say about Windows 10 and Windows 11 here? Because they do present Windows 10 and Windows 11. These are all Windows 11. Why do I think these are Windows 10? Tires, Test Suite, GeoMean. Why do they have two of the same charts? These are identical, right? Why did they have two of the charts added twice? This is why it's confusing. I thought there was a difference here. My brain made up a 10. My brain made up a 10. These are identical. Average FPS, GeoMean, entire test suite, 1080p, Windows 11, 4090, 1080, PBO, equals overclocked AMD. All OC uses XMP Expo, UV Undervolt. These are identical charts, but they aren't, are they? The numbers are different. They just make a new chart with more data on it? Like it doesn't have Expo or PBO on it. Yeah, this just includes overclocks. Why would you do this? Okay, I stand corrected, guys. This is literally just a chart with more stuff on it that they didn't include normally because they don't want you to see the extra things and get confused. I see. So the first chart that you look at doesn't have PBO, Expo, or the overclocks on it. Do that. What the fuck is that shit? Okay, not Windows 10, Windows 11. That'd be a meaningful difference to test out, right? Hardware. Tomshardware, what the fuck? I guess you can just read it here. The first slides are simplified without the overclocking configs, while the remainder contain full roster or test configurations. Haha! Hey, look, guys. They actually explained it in the first sentence. If you read the article, it would explain in the first sentence. I don't know why they did that, though. Fuck with people that are skimming. Okay, so MP2 is fantastic, by the way. So I don't know, guys. This basically comes down to like a 13900K, a 7800 X3D, or a 7950 X3D, which is an extra $300. Okay, I think we've seen enough. I don't think we're going to be able to get it. None of these other, I assume anyone that doesn't have views isn't generally worth looking at here, but maybe they are. Maybe there's a diamond in the rough. I'm not going to take a look for them. We looked at, I didn't show you guys, but I looked at TechSpot earlier today, which probably has some of the better benchmarking. There isn't really anything of interest here, particularly. They test like 5, 6 games too. Actually, more than that, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they have a bonus section, which is good. So they have like 13 games. This is worth looking at. Gamers Nexus was very disappointing for a while, where they're testing 5 or 6 games. Kind of formulating a conclusion on it. Even more impressive is when they test multiplayer games. Occasionally, Hardware Unboxed will do that. They haven't with the recent review. The only one that did that was OptimumTech. Okay. Want to take a look at Goat. Take a look at that. Look at that. We don't have time tonight. Alright, let's take a look at the Reddits now. Efficiency discussion. Core cache distribution. Okay. I'm pretty sure the 7900X3D is going to be a shitter. Manually assign core affinity in 7950X3D. Kind of looking an awful lot like where if you start messing around with their Frankenstein of bandages, you're actually going to end up worse off. Where I manually assign cores right now with process lasso, I think if you did that with the 7900X3D or 7950X3D, it's going to make things worse. Preview. Oh my god, they did a simulated 7800X3D too. Techpowerup guys actually doing it. Is TechSpot or Techpowerup that I think maybe it's Techpowerup that I looked at, maybe not TechSpot. TechSpot? Oh, it's Techpowerup. Yeah, I looked at this earlier this morning. It wasn't TechSpot, it's Techpowerup. Techpowerup's good because they actually offer some interesting utilities, too, that people use. They found a weird niche, guys. Good for them. Looked at this earlier today. They're the ones that are testing prefer cache, prefer latency, which you can find right here. And PBO, a slight PBO overclock. Stock is just the default settings. Which prefer cache actually turns out to be faster sometimes than the stock driver setting, which you wouldn't think is the case. And here it is, which is why the other reviewers had to test this and why it was important and why I mentioned it. Prefer frequency is almost always on the bottom, exception being Counter-Strike Go. Well, listen to Charles here. Oh my god, they did a lot. Basically made a brand new article out of this. Practically they can. But they also did not simulate a 7900 X3D. Another interesting proposition. Yeah, this was the whole reason they have V-Cache on only one chiplet is because it's easier and cheaper. Sounds good to someone wearing a suit, and it turns out it's actually a bad idea. Especially when you're paying a premium for this shit. This review will present performance numbers of Ryzen 7950 X3D processor with the second CCD disabled, leaving it just one with 96 megabytes of level 3 cache. Description isn't perfect. Simulation of a 7800 X3D. The core speed of 7800 X3D will be lowered according to AMD's announcement, and boosting behavior may be slightly different. Yeah, and how the driver sees the chip might be different. Yeah. And skip to games. So the CCD 0 disabled is down here. So this is once again why I mentioned that it was important for them to test these three settings here, because even though talking about hardware unbox here, even though they didn't test, they tested the simulated 7800 X3D. They did not test the prefer cache or prefer frequency. Very weird chips, guys. Not something you can just easily test and spit out a benchmark, as most of the benchmarkers did. Really kind of, when you put the axe to the grindstone here, really shows the difference between some of the reviewing outlets and other ones. Techtubers / tech reviewers and each other. So, still showing negative in 720p. So this is why it's important to test 720p, because it's highly CPU bound. It's kind of curious because Hardware Unboxed was showing that it actually, the simulated 7900 X3D was performing about on par with or better than the 7950 X3D, which makes me wonder if they had something wrong with their test setup. Have I seen the movie The Whale? No. That sounds like something indie movie. I don't know, guys. When you start looking at this stuff, guys, it really actually makes you wonder if you should just buy a 13900K and just fuck it. Just fuck it, bucket. Because look how good the 3900K is. Once again, they aren't showing the 1% lows here. And this is fucking important part is 1%, 0.1%. So they have a separate area where they show them. And I don't think, once again, they do a good job of either presentation or testing them. And 0.1% too. There's some times when the extra cache is actually very meaningful. And then there's other times where you're paying a premium for a half-baked product from the looks of it. Here it is, and Doom Eternal is performing very well. Oh, they test both sides of the chip. They test basically a neutered 7950 X3D, which only has the fast cache on, the frequency cache, or the frequency side on. And then they also test the side with the cache on. Okay, that makes more sense here. And even then, sometimes you're actually looking at a performance improvement when they test one side compared to the other side. That's hilarious. I think CCD1, which is the second one, is the cache side. They need to label this differently, because CCD1 and CCD0 is misleading. They should have like one that's like the frequency side and one that's cache side, and should label as such. Faster side and then free cache side or something. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even notice that. Yeah. So I was looking at here and I thought this was the cache side. No, cache side is here. It's the browner brown. The browner brown is cache side, and then this is the frequency side. I see. Counter-Strike Go likes its FPS, guys, or it likes its frequency. They did a lot of... They did the majority in here, guys. I think they tested most of everything that I'd want to see out of benchmarks. Out of everything that was tested here, I think Techpowerup has actually done the best job of benchmark. They don't have any tech tubes, though. I think they did the best job so far of testing all this out. But they did not test a simulated 7900 X3D, which is also pretty important, because that's a data point that's somewhere in between that a lot of people are considering. 13900K. 900K. Yeah, it's looking an awful lot like it's just like with Hardware Unboxed. I was looking at the purple number. It's not the purple number. Purple number is frequency side. It's looking an awful lot like a 7800 X3D is really the win. Unless they can fix the growing issues that the 7950 X3D is having. Exclusively relates to the thread scheduler and the fact that they made a Frankenstein monster. See, so it looks like the majority, when there's weird issues, it looks like the 7950X3D almost exclusively, if you set to prefer cache, it almost completely cleans up the issues with it, but still sometimes it doesn't, as can be seen in your Doom Internal. So even if you set this thread scheduler to prefer cache, it doesn't always work out properly. And prefer frequency is also not the right answer here, nor is the stock setting, which is kind of hilarious. So there's something going on here with the thread scheduler that's borking it, but once again, it seems like if you turn game bar on, it fixes it? I don't know. Like, this is one of those things where you have to turn on, like, the game bar setting, you set to game mode, and then it will fix it. But I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what I read on the forums so far. They don't test that. Once again, 13900K, just sitting up here pretty peachy, right? Makes you really wonder, just maybe you should just pull the trigger in the 13900 or 13700K here. 13900K is probably what I'd go with. Just click that button. But then you got something down here and you're looking at it and going, hey, you actually get a pretty meaty gain. All this could have been alleviated if both chiplets had cache on them. Even though it was half the size, if both chiplets had cache on them. Didn't. I think in my videos, blocking lots of Linux benchmarks. Yay, that's a very small market there. I think in my comments, I downgraded. That's clickbait. He went to OLED is my guess. In my comments, I actually wrote TechSpot, not Techpowerup. Clickbait image. Techpowerup, not TechSpot.
Amount of L3. Can't most of the time see too much of a difference between a 13.6,
Yeah.
13.9, 7950X.
All right, I didn't even mention the website there.
Yo, how's it going?
Where were we? We're looking at preview. And once again, set prefer cache 211. Disabling one of the entire CCDs 266. The fuck is this in AMD? For the love of God, you tried. You had a diamond in the rough, and you're like, hey, maybe we can cut this diamond in the rough into 2 diamonds, and then you made shit. You made a shit salad, AMD. You made a shit salad. That's what you did. You took a diamond in the rough, which was the 1500X3D, and then you turned it into a shit salad. Congratulations. Be like one of my comments. even then, like, it's kind of a shame here too, guys, because it really looks like you could, if this worked properly, if both these chips, so if you guys know 7900X 3D and this, or the 7900 and the 7950, both have 2 chiplets on it. So they have to split the workloads between these 2 chiplets, which generally works all right. But they fucked it up because only one of these, the slower one, has the X3D cache on it, and the faster one does not. And they tried to min-max their money by only giving you one with X3D cache, and in doing so, just basically just ruined everything. They just fucked up everything because there's so many results here where it's pulling ahead in with just one of the CCDs on, and then there's other times when it's the default mode, other times it's prefer cache, and other times it's prefer frequency, and then it doesn't make sense. They fucked the pooch. They literally fucked the pooch, which is what I was worried about. I don't know if we're gonna go through the higher end. We'll just take a look at this real quick. The 1080p. Actually, I think they have just an overall benchmark number at that end here. It's probably more the same. Have an overall. Relative performance, average FPS. What's the difference between the two? Oh, relative to the normal number. Jesus Christ. Yeah, so relative number. Prefer cache is actually better than the stock. And CCD1, which is the theoretical 7800X3D, is also better than stock. And there's the 13900K, which has none of these issues. So overall, once again, 720p. Stock. Yeah, I think Techpowerup actually did the best out of all the media outlets we've looked at so far, guys. I think Techpowerup covered basically almost all the angles properly. And with the exception being there's no simulated 7900X3. That's a weird angle, but something people are considering as an option, and I think you can surmise that it's just going to be worse. It's just going to be worse than everything else here. At the end of the day. Yeah. We're going to take a look. Once again, they actually test 1% too, which is good. I think 0.1% is meaningful, but they don't test that. And there's better ways of presenting. I think the three bars for 1%, 0.1%, and average are the best way of doing it. And you just make these bars smaller. But then you can't put the labels on as easily, so I don't know. I think it's better than having pages, but they also get paid based on the pages too, so they want you to turn the page for clicks, for ad revenue, which is one of the downsides of still being a tech review website. Instead of ads built into the video. Dying Breed. Techpowerup was not a place you go for benchmarks 10 years ago. Now it is. This is pretty good. This is better than Tomshardware, I'd say. This is probably better than Kitguru for sure. This is testing all the right spots. Them. This is a 7800X3D right here. Okay, let's scroll down and we're gonna go and take a look. Maybe we'll check 4K real quick because that's just where it starts running into a bottleneck. And then 1300. Oh, it's on top. So this runs into resolution bottleneck or GPU bottleneck. So processor matters less, and you can see things like 13600K here being almost identical. But then where Gamers Nexus was like, hey, just buy a 13600K because it doesn't fucking matter. Like we can look here for the 13600K and see it's at 89.9 and 231. And more interestingly is when we're going to look at the 1% here, which is what really matters for cache. And 0.1% would also have been good. This is 1% lowest. It's not 99th percentile. I don't know why these are being used interchangeably. 99th percentile is 0 through 99% of your data. and then 1%, which is usually the top or bottom. It's cut out. But they don't tell you which side it goes. That's why you don't say 90th percentile. 90th percentile can cut out 0.5% on both sides of the tail end, for instance. You don't know which way it goes. But 1% low is easy to tell that it's the lowest 1% that is they're looking at, which is what you want to see. This is the stuttering and micro stuttering. The stuttering is more evident in 0.1% and micro stuttering in 1%. Actually, it's... No, that's right. Micro stuttering tends to be smaller stutters. It's either or, whichever direction it goes. So now we look at this 13600 is down to 161. Oh, they aren't doing relative. 161 compared to 179. Or 177 for the i9. Crazy. For cache, actually edges out on top and is actually very close to just the 7800X, which is what you'd want to see, because that means it'll have possibly some benefits of actually having 8 more cores, but possibly not. And you're paying an extra $250 for that. How much actually? $800? It's $800, right? $700. I don't know what I'm going to do, guys. It's actually looking an awful lot like it should just get the 3900K. 7800X3D might also be the right option, but then we have to wait 5 weeks, and it might just be... Oh, maybe I should just wait for 7800X3D. It's really just a case of how long I want to wait. And then if I want to buy one now, would I get a 13900K or would I get a 7950X3D? I think the 7900X3D is going to be a piece of shit. I don't want 16 cores, by the way. But I think the 7950X3D would mitigate the problems with the X3D setup. On popular demand, game test 720p. Of course, nobody buys a PC with 4090 to run games at 720p, but the results are academic value because the CPU can't do 144 frames per second at 720p, will never reach that mark at higher resolutions. So these numbers could be interest high refresh rate game PC builders with faster monitors. Our test 720p synthetic. Yeah, or in the case that the 5090 comes out 2 years from now. Surprise! There is going to be a new video card in the future that will be faster than a 4090. Ah, magic hands. I don't understand why. It's kind of weird. The more like with the weird shit going on with like people like not retcon, well sometimes retconning, but like bringing up like really old history and just they oftentimes perpetuate it as it being a reality now. It seems like people can't differentiate between past, present, and future, and I don't understand why. But it's starting to seem like almost like, you know how some people don't have an internal, like they don't have an internal voice. It's starting to seem like one of these things where people don't understand past, present, and future. I assume most people do, right? But it's actually starting to seem like some people can't differentiate between past events, especially when they go further back in time, and future events that could potentially happen in the future. Everyone likes to talk about predictions and being predictive and analyzing and being proactive or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, it should be really easy to understand that a 5090 is going to come out in 2 years from now, more than likely, And it will probably be a lot faster than a 4090. Maybe not at same speed. It might just be 50% faster, or it might be 100% faster. We don't know, but it'll definitely be faster than a 4090. That's a pretty safe bet. That's a pretty safe bet. So 720p would matter because that means essentially you'd be playing a 720p in the future on a 5090 would probably be like 1080p is currently, or opposite direction that. No, yeah, that's right. So what a 720p. Excuse me, 1080p in the future would be what 720p is now. There we go. That's the correct direction. Very weird. But anyways, like, look at this. Just look how fucked up these benchmarks are. Like, it is so fucking weird that you can have, like, prefers cache seems to be very useful, but no one except Techpowerup tested this, by the way. No one except Techpowerup tested this. And then the theoretical 7800X3D is also very useful, but also not there. Be 100%. It probably that is something. If you want to surmise based on a current trend, because I believe the 3090 was $1,400. That means if it's the same linear relationship here, we're gonna see a 5090 that's probably gonna be like $1,800 or maybe $2,000. So, also a potential future price point there. So, yeah. And I don't think it even matters how much faster it is. It doesn't matter at all. It's just NVIDIA is so out of it as far as why their video cards were demanded. It was fucking weird with crypto, and then they didn't respond to crypto crash. Very weird. AMD responded. They responded, and I think they're going to go back to normal prices, and then they realized how much NVIDIA was charging, and then they upped it a little bit. Like, I could have seen them actually selling the XTX for $800, and instead upped it to $1,000 because NVIDIA sold a 4090 for $1,600. So, yeah, I mean, the XTX is still, if I had a choice between AMD or NVIDIA, which I don't because of my weird-ass setup, I would choose AMD hands down for an XTX right now. Because it's not only faster than a 4080, it's sometimes a lot faster than a 4080. Putting aside ray tracing, if you really get off and looking at the fucking, if you really get off at looking at the little light sheen off someone's eyeball bouncing off a bus window, then buy NVIDIA for sure. But for majority of normal people, you want to get the 7000 series right now. It's just hands down better, and it's basically faster than the 4080 and sometimes a lot faster than the 4080 for $200 cheaper. And sometimes it even matches the 4090. That's not a small feat. If my my setup wasn't so weird, I would definitely get an XTX, and it kind of hurts that I can't. Because that is the right decision right now if I want to get a top-end video card. Anyways, unless you want the absolute best case scenario and then buy a 4090, right? Best at everything. But anyways, like, looking at this, it really just makes you, like, look at this, look how close this is, and you just realize that there are growing issues here. This should all be identical to each other, and it's not, because there's growing issues with what they're trying to do, and it is band-aids on band-aids with duct tape. I'm trying to like, there's numerous articles you could comment on Reddit, and I'm actually just trying to postulate which the best place is to make a comment. Because I'm not going to comment on each one of the videos and each one of the reviews. I think hands down Techpowerup did the best job here. But there's still some things that I would have liked to seen and aren't even in this article. Windows 10 versus Windows 11 would also have been curious, by the way, if you have to use Windows 11. They say you can use Windows 10 or Windows 11. That isn't always the way the world works, and sometimes you can do a limited benchmark run. I really hope a slightly bloated Windows install would also show cracks in the shit show here. And no one has tested that. I made comments about that months in advance. Months in advance. On videos, on Twitter, on Reddit. Yeah. They do performance per dollar too. Too bad they don't have a tech channel. We'd totally watch this. FPS 13900K 177. 750 X3D, this is overall their benchmarks, 177. Also, they don't test multiplayer benchmarks, but almost no one does. And no input latency measurements for cache and CCD1 disabled. So it definitely looks like the end result here, guys, is more than likely you're going to want to get a 7800 X3D. If you want to wait 5 weeks. Might even be better than that. Although maybe not, because they said that the processor is supposed to be slower, but that also could be potentially because they weren't talking about max speed of each chiplet. They're talking about instead the max speed of a chiplet, because you have one which is slow and one is fast for the 7950, 7900X, and one is going to be faster than the other ones. They could be quoting the fast one. Performance summary, relative performance. Performance per dollar. Higher is better. Yikes. 13900K represents a 25% performance improvement, or performance per dollar increase. Where's a 13, was it 700 or 13800? 13700? Can't search this. 13700 is 150 because it's 330. 425, excuse me. Jesus Christ, guys. View as a single page. What? Do I have an art? Do I have a account here? an account pretty much in every tech website. Time began. What do the kids have running Steam? Do I have running? What I have running is Chrome tabs. I don't like this type of reply, by the way. I like the ones that are basically at the bottom of the page. This, if you click anywhere here, will close this window and then you'll lose all your text. Maybe you won't. Maybe this is lovely, but I've done this before. Let's do this. I copy pasted that. Oh, look, my post is gone now because I accidentally clicked off the window. Oh, it's still here. Good for them. They actually have good forum software. I definitely had forums where you click away and it's gone. So, yeah. Preview. I don't know why you'd ever do a preview. Actually, that's different. The live previews I don't like. That's preview. 10 plus years. Joined in 2011. Uh-huh. No problem. Here every day. Interesting. Maybe I'll, Anandtech kind of went the way of the dodo is. Oh my god, they have a review up right away. Good for them. Played on the last couple. Average 99th, which is 1% lows. So they do 480p as a way of completely removing a CPU bottleneck. No tech tubers do this, by the way, for whatever reason. Do not test prefer cache, prefer frequency. They do not test 800X3D simulated. And Windows 11, just Windows 11, I guess. $95th? So they don't even test 1% lows, they test 5% lows. Starting to get into the territory of that's not actually what you're looking for to test stuttering. Even 2% is starting to get up there. Like 1% is really where you want to be. You get too many good data points in there that fuck up the shitters. You want to look at the shit data points, not the good ones. That's the whole point of testing 1% lows and 0.1%. Almost no one tests 0.1%, by the way. It's also weird. It just means you have to test more to make the results consistent. What else do they have going on here? That's pretty good. They're on top of this shit. News releases. Nice. Like the test monitors. Not alphabetical monitors. For 30th. Some of these look pretty good. I mean, that's not uncommon. It's what we already saw. But you're talking about $700 compared to $550 you can find it for. Yeah, I'd say that even the 5% lows here is not what you want to see. That's borderline pointless. That's not really going to tell you much of anything. I think that's what you want to be. Meanwhile, they do test really low resolutions, right? Where there aren't many websites that have done that. Reviewers that tested 1%. Low resolution, not 1%. I still remember, guys. So, you know how I was talking about maybe not everyone understands past, present, and future, which seems to be a no-brainer, right? Just like some people don't have an internal voice. I remember back when I was in college, the first time I was in college, something that still stuck with me is I had an English teacher, and she was talking to us about, like, writing in different forms, like, you know, past, present, and future forms, right? Talking about something that's happened or something that will happen or is currently happening. And she said that you should make sure you always use the same, like if you want to talk about something in the past, talk about it as if it's something in the past versus talking about something. Some people will confuse what they're saying and skip between past, present, and future. As I forgot what they called, like, there's a name for it. It's, called verb tenses. Central divisions of time in English. Present represents actions happening now, while the past presents actions that have happened earlier, and the future describes actions that will happen later. Yeah. And she was talking about it as some people will actually intermingle all of them together. Well, sometimes I do that too, where I'll talk about past and present. Not interchangeably, but like I'll separate it, but there's actually people that will go between past, present, and future while they're talking about something in literature, like writing it. And I guess that's how it operates. Like, it makes me start to wonder that's how that operates in their brain. Like, they confuse past, present, and future just with what's going on. And that's sort of weird. I don't know. This is all hypothetical stuff because I don't have any data points on this, where some people have an internal voice, internal monologue, and other people don't, is actually a thing. I don't know if this is a thing, but it's starting to seem more and more like it based on just stuff I'm reading about, like, people just, like, bringing up, like, past events that have happened, like, 100 years ago and then trying to apply it immediately to today. Even though the past, especially 100 years ago, there's a world war that happened 80 years ago, right? There's a lot of stuff. Civil rights movement happened in the 80s, was it? Civil rights movement was the 80s. That was 40 years ago. There's a lot of shit that has happened in the last 100 years, but there's people that will perpetuate something that happened in, like, 1920 as something that's happening right now, and it's completely different. 2 world wars happened since the 1920s. It's crazy. But this is where we are now, and it's starting to make more sense that maybe some people aren't very good at differentiating past, present, and future from other people, and not necessarily that they can't, but they don't necessarily see the differentiation immediately, and people are kind of abusing that. I don't know, though. It's pretty weird. But the whole, like, it was mind-blowing when I heard about the fact that not everyone has an internal monologue, by the way. Internal voice, because I routinely will talk about stuff internally with myself, like, not when I'm streaming, obviously. Well, even sometimes while I'm streaming. But I'll internally talk about things in my mind or converse about things and try weigh and balance options and basically internally discuss things. And if you can't do that, then you just miss out on, like, a whole lot of internal reflection or, what is it called? Introspection. You, like, unable to have introspection, so you'll be unable to analyze yourself internally and talk about yourself internally with yourself, which I think is really important to most people. Weird. Very weird. Not seeing a whole lot of anything outside the ordinary here, guys. What is very interesting, though, is it is still looking like a 13900K. And I'm actually starting to think, even if I waited for the 7800X 3D, is actually, I think, the optimal option. If I opted for a 7950X 3D right now, even putting aside the price, which I don't really even have that much of an issue with, the problem is the inconsistent performance that will continually basically just dog the processor over time. If AMD does not keep up with the support or it gets worse and you don't notice it, you might end up with a shitbird of a processor and not even notice that your processor is broken. And that's kind of a bad, like, your computer's going to gaslight you. I talk about that currently with my current computer, but it's starting to feel that way. I think the option I have here is a 13900K or 7800X 3D, and that means I have to wait 5 weeks for that. I don't know if I want to do. Okay. We aren't going to go through and look at all the tests, because basically the only ones that really matter is the lowest resolution, which is 720p, 1080p might matter, and then 4K kind of matters. 1080p represents current, basically, benchmarks and where you're going to run into bottlenecks, so you can kind of look at it. And 4K is like worst case scenario. The 800X 3D, AMD made it too good. I think the 3D cache would not be worthwhile until 8000, 9000 series when they get the clock speed throttling resolved. It's not just clock speed, they fucked up this generation with putting the chiplet only on one, the V cache on only one. They tried to min-max right when they're getting things out of the gate, and instead of just taking a hit to their pricing, like taking a hit to their margins, they decided to try and push like basically a beta version of a processor out, which is what we're seeing right now. And I think they fucked the pooch on it. $157. My guess is the majority of discussion is going to go here. Linux on the 7950X3D. Yay! That's a pretty small niche right there, I guess. Well, it's not about the average FPS, it's about the 1% or 0.1%. Why are you always so angry, Dome? Like, do you have like a horrible life, or are you fighting in Ukraine right now? Like, you always seem angry when you're in chat. You should have a trip on some magic mushrooms or something. We just looked at an article about that yesterday. It's actually pretty interesting. A couple days ago was the John Oliver bit, where he's talking about cyclobin. And basically the life-altering experience it gives you, where it allows you to reflect on basically your life and things that just upset you without making you angry. It's pretty cool. In clinical trials they were talking about too. Or I guess that's just a adventurous college experience, as it turns out. With your friends, so you have someone that will prevent you from doing something really stupid. Huh. Or in the case of clinical trials, they have two people that you pay a shitload of money to while they sit there and watch you trip out of your balls. We're just going to cross-paste this. Perry Gian's review, I think, Hardware Unboxed. There's a lot of weird shit that was going on here. Yeah, they never discussed the BIOS settings at all in the HuB review. Never talked about the game bar. You're not the most positive person. Maybe it's you and that makes me mad. What? That sounds like projecting. You're projecting me, projecting my disinterest on you? I had a bad day at work today because of you. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's crazy. That's some anger in there. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Slane. Holy fuck. It's like occasionally you get people in your chat like that don't want you to be happy. It's kind of the weird thing about it. It oftentimes, normally some people like amount it to like hate watching, which it kind of feels that way. But like there's, for some reason, I'll occasionally get viewers, and just talking in generals here, occasionally I'll get viewers that like just get angry at the fact that like I enjoy myself, or I enjoy whatever I'm doing, or enjoy what I'm typing about. And it oftentimes seems like not only they're trying to shit on your mood, but like it actually just irks them that you are enjoying who you are. And I've never really understood that. I don't think it's even just hate watching. It's really weird. Really, really fucking weird. It's occasionally it happens over the years. You'll get someone that's just like angry that you're happy. And like you said that I'm unhappy. I'm definitely, I enjoy talking about tech. I enjoy, the entire night, guys, has been me discussing the 7950 X3D, the X3D launch in general, which I've been waiting for a while. We spent the entire night looking at reviews, going over different stuff, talking about it on forums, talking about Reddit, and discussing with chat. I am enjoying myself. This is something I've been waiting for. It sucks that the 7950 X3D was not as good as it could have been. So maybe that sucks because now I'll have to wait for the 7800 X3D or buy 13900K. But I'm not like, oh my god, my life is ruined. I hate AMD. I'm gonna throw my computer out the window. Oh god, anger. Oh geez, so angry right now. Fucking weird. Oh, okay. Thanks for giving me permission to be critical of what's going on. Oh geez, dude. Is this where you now insert that, but you're whining? I believe is usually the line that is inserted with that is where you go, but you're actually whining or something along those lines. Even though I don't think I've whined at any point here, but jeez, dude. Normally I don't double post on a post because usually people don't like it. So double posting on an article. One's in reference to how they tested stuff and the other's in the reference to the actual chips. Was it Techpowerup? No, it's Kitguru. Oh my god, Idwin, pee poo poo poo. Yeah, there's a release 950. The X3D chips just came out today. Or the reviews came out yesterday. They're coming out later this morning. I don't think I'm going to buy one. I waited 6 months for this. And if I knew this was going to happen 6 months ago, I would have 100% bought 12 or 13900K. And instead, here we are, where I might need to wait another 5 weeks just to get an X3D processor, which might not even totally be worth it. So, yeah. Double post there. Cross post again. And where's the hardware unboxed review? Techpowerup, actually. The least amount of comments and upvotes here, but definitely the best review right here is from Techpowerup. But it's also not a video. Alrighty, so what is the end result here, guys? I don't know. I think it really just comes down to me waiting for the 7800X 3D or buy a 13900K or possibly a 13700K. Sometimes that's the problem. That's why I'm typing a bunch of shit, Dome. Is sometimes it is sometimes the fastest processor, and other times it occasionally the 13900K will beat it, and then sometimes it beats itself. Like it has. There's a couple different ways you can run it. One is where you just run it like a 7800X 3D, which is where you turn off one of the cores, because 7950X 3D has two chiplets on it, and basically two separate chips. They're connected to each other. One has extra V cache on it, or the 3D cache on it. The other one is just a fast processor. And what they're finding out is sometimes Windows does not balance your programs across these properly, which is where all these weird results are coming from here. And as such, sometimes you can set up different things in the BIOS. Sometimes you can set it to prefer cache. Other times you can set it to prefer the CCD. Like you operate it like a 7800X 3D, which is a processor coming out a month from now. Or you operate it like just stock. And then sometimes they tested out just a theoretical, just the fast processor down here. Prefer frequency is also another mode, and some games will benefit like that from that, which is like Counter-Strike. This is a weird bird. And then minimum FPS is your 1% lowest. I need to take a piss real quick here, guys. I'll be right back. 1 second. Sounds complicated. Let's just buy the 13900K. Yeah, this is what it's coming down to. It sounds like this is such a convoluted mess. Don't even mess with, because at some point this could just break. There's a bunch of driver shit that just has to work in the background. At some point this could just break, and then you're going to end up with a shitbird CPU and not know it, right? So it basically comes down to these two right here, or just waiting for the 7800X3D, which is what this basically is simulated supposed to represent, is this guy right here, is the 7800X3D, which will be $400 in 5 weeks. E-cores on a laptop. Yeah, I mean, you can reduce the number of E-cores, which is what the 3700 is. This is 8 P-cores and 8 E-cores, I think it is. 16. I think this is 8 and 16. And this is 8 and 8. All 13,000 series. $700 is 8, and it almost runs exactly at the same speed as the 3900K. Little eye bleed mode on from yesterday. This morning, actually. There's a lot of people cheating in Overwatch this morning. Holy fucking shit. I played after I went offline. Oh god, I had a Baptiste with his fucking aim just locked to my chest constantly. It was horrible. But yeah, this basically just comes down to lots of bullshittery if you want to do this, or you disable the one of your CCDs, which is basically just buying a $700 processor to turn off one of the chiplets in it, which is ridiculous. Yeah, and at that point, why would you do this to yourself? Why would you do this? So like the thing it doesn't show here is that some of these games actually perform really well on this guy, and then sometimes they don't. And the ones that they don't could be fixed if it actually worked properly, but it doesn't. It's all over the fucking place. It definitely is like a beta product. I don't know. I might just buy a 3900K. I think I might just say fuck it for this generation, guys. I think AMD has fucked the pooch so hard that I should just get a 13900 or 13700K. 6 months later, get a 13700 or 13900K. And then maybe the 8000 series will come back to the X3D. Yeah, I don't know. I think it really, really depends on what you're going to do here. Like, it's not just a little bit. Some of these games, guys, like the extra 3D cache actually performs really well. And then some, it doesn't help at all. Like, some of the bigger numbers were on different benchmarks that they didn't test on Techpowerup. Like, some of these are pretty meaty. Like Factorio, for instance, there's a couple that Hardware Unboxed tested that they didn't test here. So even then, like if you look at the benchmarks they test here, is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are ray tracing. So they tested 12 benchmarks, which is pretty good. I faulted Gamers Nexus for testing way too few games. Hardware Unboxed is really where we want to be, so. And then they're doing a 25 game comparison, but he said it was going to be like a month or something like that before he does it, because he's going on vacation. Yeah, I guess spring break. March or April. Okay, maybe it's not spring break. He said he's going on vacation. Actually, it's going to be different because he's in Australia, so maybe a little bit different. He's taking a family vacation, whatever it is. Really shitty time to do that, by the way. Because right now is when you need to pump the articles. There's like all this time. I've mentioned this before when the 7000 series GPUs released. The 7000 series GPUs released and Gamers Nexus was lollygagging in China, just doing like factory tours. And then there's like an entire lull in the month of like December to basically now, end of February, in which you could like end of Christmas to now, in which you could do whatever the fuck you want and it didn't really matter. and they choose to take vacations in the middle of when you're supposed to be pushing and actually doing work. Like, it's not hard. There's a downturn, you take a vacation. When there's an upturn, you work hard, right? And they chose to work hard or take a vacation when they're supposed to be working hard. Both of them. Gamers Nexus did it earlier. I guess maybe there's something I don't know and their lives are, more complicated. But from a work standpoint, you don't take a vacation when you actually need to pump articles, right? It depends on the motherboard price. They all cover that. They're essentially the same at this point. If you want to get a memory and motherboard configuration, they're about the same between AMD and Intel now. So it's not really a problem. I'm not gonna, even if I buy Intel, I'm not gonna keep my current memory and motherboard. I'm not gonna get a DDR4 processor. Go for DDR5. Crazy, guys. There's so much going on here. Autumn next week in Australia. So do you guys just have a time off or something special going on? Because he said he's taking a break and he's in Australia. The other guy, Chris, which also works at Hardware Unboxed, is in UK. So they do the Queenglish holidays. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. At the end of this is the shittiest thing about this, guys, is at the end of all of this, I still do not have a definitive answer on what I want to do. End of all this shit, I think it's like probably the best case scenario here is just waiting for the 7800X3D or buy a 13900K. I think is what it comes down to, is 13900, which is not really, it's just between basically 13900 and 7800X3D. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe his family vacation or something he planned. Either way, it's a bad time to take a vacation if you're a tech tuber. I mean, it does make sense if you take a holiday when no one else has a holiday. Not really what it's talking about, but sure. So you don't have to put up with people just fucking around with you. There's being a bunch of people being around. Talking about scheduling in general, though. I don't know, guys. This was what I was waiting for, but the moment I heard that it was going to be an asymmetrical design in January earlier this year, so the chips are going to be different, I knew there's going to be fuckery because the Windows scheduler sucks dick, and from what it looks like, your AMD has tried their best to band-aid all these systems together to make them work, and they don't always work properly, which is why you can see here. This is important, by the way. These results that they tested, except for maybe the purple one, were all important and needed to be tested. And you can see here, they're all, this is the 1%, they're just all over the fucking place. There's different configurations that just work in one case and different configurations that work in another case. And as I mentioned before, I think if any of these guys tested a partially bloated Windows install, it would just make this even worse. This would turn into a shit show. It'd be even, well, it is a shit show, it'd be even worse than it currently is. No one tested a partially bloated Windows config, so maybe it'll come in the future. I tweeted about it, I posted on videos, I left comments on Reddit. No one tested partially bloated Windows. Because that's where it's going to be accessing the processor more often, and it's going to throw all this shit off. I don't know, maybe the option here is just to wait and see what articles come out in the next coming couple of weeks here. And maybe 7800X3D in the future. Is obviously won't have any problems with, well, might still have problems with scheduler, but you don't know. Partially bloated Windows might also fuck up the the PE core configs from Intel too. You don't know because no one tests it, because it's not something people want to test, right? So that could also fuck up the PE core configs, because that's also dependent on asymmetrical design, but it tries to weigh and balance things properly. There's a thread director, and Intel did a relatively good job on it too, so yeah. I don't know, guys. I don't know. I'm still at a loss. I think I might just literally just say fuck it bucket and just go with the 13900 or 13700 here. And all these growing pains and growing issues that AMD is having, I won't need to deal with until the next generation. I don't know. I think I'm gonna... Yeah, I'm waiting for the... I was hoping NVIDIA would drop prices. They haven't. I'd hope there would be like a 4080 Ti. There isn't. NVIDIA has not mentioned price drops in any way, shape, or form. And their video cards are all really expensive. So, yeah, that's another just, I'm not in a good position. So, there is no winning. There's no winning, and I can't buy an XTX because of my streaming config. So, here we are. Here we are, guys. Yeah, alrighty, guys. We're out of here for tonight, guys. This is a pretty good stream. I know some of you guys are into tech, and some people want to watch my podcast, and other people want to watch me game. We aren't going to game tonight. We're even over normally, and I honestly don't have an answer here. This is something I'm going to have to think on, and maybe reach consensus, look at posts or something, maybe reach an idea of what I want to do here. I don't know. I'm not buying these on launch. I'm not buying the 7950. I'm not buying the 7000, 7900 X3Ds on launch. I'm going to wait to see what happens here and see where this goes. My guess is tonight, guys, we're going to be looking at 7900 X3D reviews. It's probably going to be later today, because these chips are available to buy this morning sometime, probably at 8 or something. And as such, obviously, the NDA is going to drop after that happens, because then people are going to have access to them anyways. So, yeah. I've also heard resizable bar can hurt. That's the weird thing. There's a lot of... This is putting aside snake oil shit, and this isn't even including the snake oil shit. One of the snake oil fixes is supposed to be turning off core parking. The 7900 X3D and the 7950 X3D all depend on core parking to work properly, which means you have to turn on a feature that you generally turn off because it makes your performance worse in Windows. It makes more stuttering. You have to turn it back on to fix the issues with the abomination, the Frankenstein monster, CPU going on here, just because they wanted to save on their chiplet designs. Good job, AMD. Great job. Normally you turn off core parking because it hurts performance, and now we're turning it back on because it's needed to help move threads around properly. Oh, buddy. This is yeah, I think it basically the options here are a 7800 X3D or a 13900K or 700, depending on what you want to buy, I think is the end result here. I think the 7950 and the 7900 aren't even an option if you want consistent performance. That's putting aside all the snake oil shit that's going on in the background. Things like resizable bar, there are some people that say you turn it off because it actually causes issues with stuttering. I've heard that. I don't have resizable bar on because my 2008 doesn't support it. My motherboard does, my video card does not. More things that I like. This is why I want consistent performance, because there's a lot of moving parts here, guys. There's a lot of moving parts here, and if you have one thing that's all sorts of fuckery, then it's gonna fuck with your other stuff too. So I don't know. Alrighty, guys, I'm out here for this evening, guys. I'm probably gonna put this up as a highlight because we basically aggregated all the reviews and went over basically majority of the review outlets and their testing methodology and their tests themselves and discussed them. And I think this is just a good litmus test, guys. In and of itself, the stream tonight was a good litmus test of which benchmark or which reviewers, tech reviewers, have actually got their shit together. And I think Techpowerup has done the best job here. There's stuff that I'd still like to see, but I think they actually did the best job out of all the hardware outlets so far. The hardware review websites or tech tubers, they've done the best job. As you can see here by testing stuff that isn't even tested by other reviewers. CCD0, as I mentioned before, doesn't really need to be tested, but CCD1 did, which is a simulated 7800 X3D. It doesn't have the buzzword attached to it, and they could have labeled it differently, but it is. Okay. Alrighty, guys. Tomorrow, guys, will probably be the 7900th. Release cycles happen. We cover this shit when it happens because I really enjoy it. despite what someone in chat might have said. I actually really enjoy this stuff, but, you know, to each their own, right? Yeah. And tomorrow is going to be probably 7900X3D. It's going to be less time on this, by the way, because it's going to be pretty straightforward. But I'm pretty sure the 7900X3D reviews drop later today, which we'll cover, and probably not in the depth that we have with this one, because this is the meat and potatoes prior to the 7800X3D release. So 7800X3D is going to be different than the simulated one, but it'll still be probably relatively close. We'll see where it goes. But I'm out of here for this evening, guys.